Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see second part, what if Deku became the most powerful villain. Here is short summary. Izuku Midoriya, rejected by society and betrayed by the hero system, embraces his newfound power to become the most feared villain in the world. With unmatched strength and a burning desire for vengeance, he sets out to tear down the foundations of hero society and reshape the world in his image. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. All Might stood outside of a hospital room listening to the cries of Mrs. Iida. He was trying to summon the much-needed courage to go in and speak to the woman, but he hadn't taken a single step towards the door yet. This was awful. He'd heard about the attack on the training camp and he kicked himself for not being there. He and Lemillion had been out taking in as many of the escaped convicts as they could find, in a sort of training session for Lemillion to get used to one for all. He was the symbol of peace. Damn it, how could he let this happen? He'd already visited Kirishima, who of all things was reassuring him that things would be all right. It was laughable, really, the symbol of peace of being cheered up by his injured student. All Might took a deep breath and slapped his cheeks. No point in standing out here anymore, he said, walking up to the door and grabbing hold of the handle until he heard shouting down the hallway. He knew that voice, and with sickening relief he turned and walked down the hall lights catching the bright colors of his Golden Age costume as he rounded the corner to see a furious Endeavor berating Aizawa and Vlad King. You two call yourselves heroes, and where are those worthless cats? This is as much their fault as yours. You had one damn job, and that was to NG, that's enough. All Might spoke loudly, coming down the hall to stare down the number 2 hero he'd interrupted. If you want to blame someone, blame me. I wasn't there, and as a fellow teacher I share in the responsibility of what happened to your son as well, but rest assured I will do everything to get him back. All Might spoke, placing a hand on Endeavor's shoulder, who swiftly swatted it aside. You think me or my progeny need your help, All Might? Shoto is leagues above these villains, they will not break him. I made him to be better than you, Endeavor said, glaring into All Might's eyes. No matter the reason, the hospital is not the place for this, said Principal Nezu, who came striding down the hall. I appreciate your concern as a parent, Endeavor, but there are patients here who need to regain their health in peace, so please stop bellowing and afford them that right. Besides, your anger is misguided. It was my decision to deny All Might the opportunity to go along on the training camp. With the recently released villains combined with the fact that Bane seems to have a grudge against All Might, I thought that by keeping him in the city would be for the best. I'm sorry, All Might, I selfishly thought that putting you in the public eye, the villains would focus their efforts solely on you, but I was foolish in my thinking, and as such Ua is facing a very real crisis. We have allowed 2 attacks on our students, each ending with grievous injury to our students, and now the death of one of the Ingenium family. The media is calling for a press conference and we don't have the grounds to deny them this. Aizawa, Vlad, I'm sorry to ask, but I need you to accompany me to the press conference. Vlad and Aizawa nodded, both having seen this coming, and were prepared for it, having already dressed in their formal attire. If you two would wait for me in the lobby, I would like to give my condolences to the Iida and Kirishima families, Nezu said as he made his way down the hall. As Endeavor and All Might stood in the hallway, they were approached by Detective Tsukauchi. All Might, oh, and you're here as well, Endeavor, good, that saves me time. If you two would come with me, I have good news. The number 1 and 2 heroes looked at Tsukauchi and then at each other before following the detective out of the hospital. Shoto looked around at the gathered villains, making mental notes of the room and possible escape routes as the door opened to reveal a man in a flowing white mask and covered in knives, with a sword on his back and a red scarf around his neck. I see you've accomplished your mission, Shigaraki. Now what do you intend to do with him? Stain asked as Tamura stood in front of Tamura. I know those eyes you've got, the eyes of someone who hates something with every fiber of his being. You hate it so much that you can't see anything but it. Nothing else matters besides destroying the thing you hate so much. That's how I feel about All Might. So what do you hate, Shoto Todoroki? Tamura asked, leaning down towards Shoto's cuffs. Don't do it, Tamura, Bane said, catching the attention of both student and villain. The cuffs stay on. We've seen this kid's power and know that the second you take off those suppression cuffs he's either going to turn this building into an iceberg or a raging inferno. Leave them on. Tamura stood straight staring at Bane. Are you telling me what to do? Tamura asked as he stalked over towards Bane, ignoring the shifting of Muscular and Toga, who were ready to kill Tamura in an instant. Yes, I am, and if you want this to go the way you want, I suggest you listen. Bane said, towering over the frail man before him. Tamura growled before slapping his hand on the table between him and Bane, watching it turn to dust. Watch yourself, Bane, is all Tamura said before walking back to Shoto. It's none of your business what I hate. It doesn't matter to anyone but me. It's Endeavor, isn't it? Dabi spoke from the corner, causing Shoto's mismatched eyes to lock onto him. You hate your father with an unrelenting passion, right? Dabi said, stating his assumption once more, but it was obvious to everyone in the room that he was correct given Shoto's body language. Daddy issues, hun, man, I feel you there. Beeps having a hero for a dad, I tell you. Jack said, raising his hands in a shrug. Your dad was a hero, Jack? Toga asked, to which the red-headed man nodded. Yeah, but this was back in the day before hero was a thing. But yeah, he was out there fighting crime, preaching justice, and then came home to Jack it to Kitty. Man, what a role model I had, right? He said, laughing loudly. Never saw the cops coming until it was too late, so I feel you, their kid dads are nothing but bastards with broken S. He said, tossing back his whiskey as the TV was unmuted by Kurogiri. I think everyone will want to hear this. He said simply as everyone in the bar turned to the TV. The caption under the screen read, UA press conference. At the front of the room, surrounded by flashing cameras and vicious sharks taking the form of reporters, was UA principal and teachers Nezu, Aizawa, and Vlad King. The first reporter stepped up to question the trio. Channel 5 News reporter Trisha Takanawa, I would like to ask, how does UA take responsibility for this grisly incident? A student kidnapped and another murdered. What happened to the impenetrability of UA? Nezu spoke immediately after. UA takes full responsibility for this incident and offer our condolences to the Iida family and our assurances that we will get Shoto Todoroki back, and are currently doing a complete overhaul of our security measures and are soon going to implement an extreme measure that will assure everyone that we can and will keep their children safe. There were a barrage of questions until another reporter stepped forward. Condolences, that's all you have to say. We put our children's lives in your hands, and after you drop the ball, all you have are condolences and assurances. We have a statement that Eraserhead abandoned his student Ejiro Kirishima to fight a villain who we know has already murdered fully licensed heroes. What do you have to say to this, Shota Aizawa? Vlad swallowed nervously as Aizawa stood up from his seat. Everyone in the room could tell he was furious, and the reporter who asked this question gave a small smirk, awaiting the statement that would allow him to bury these so-called heroes. Aizawa dropped into a deep bow. I have no excuse. I did in fact leave Kirishima to fight a villain, and all I can say is thank you. Because of Kirishima's actions, a young boy's life was saved. There is no way I could ever fully repay the heroic actions of my student, but I hope that this will in some way make up for my inadequacies as a teacher. I will be tendering my resignation with UA effective immediately. The room was silenced by this admission. Even the reporter who'd egged Aizawa on was floored. All I have to say is that to the villains who kidnapped my student, they will find no way to break him. Shoto Todoroki is one of the strongest students in my class, both physically and mentally. He will grow to be a great hero even without my tutelage. Tamura looked at the screen and laughed. Man, the heroes are having a bad time of it, wouldn't you say, Shoto? It's like they're being treated as the bad guys, but that's unfair, isn't it? They were doing their best, shouldn't that count for something? Tamura asked as he crouched down in front of Shoto. This is the world we live in, Shoto. It's unfair, but everybody thinks things are fine because we have idiots like All Might who make us feel safe and protected. You know, I actually respect your father, you know. He's a complete ass, but that's because he's not trying to coddle everyone. He lets them know that heroes are just as ugly as the rest of the world. So come on, Shoto, why don't you join us and help show people how ugly the world really is? Shoto looked into Tamura's eyes silently for a moment. All Might sat in the passenger seat of Tsukauchi's car while Endeavor inhabited the backseat. They had been silent ever since the ride had begun. Tsukauchi had declined telling them what the good news was until they reached their destination, which was the meeting room in an office building. Stepping inside, the top two heroes were greeted by many of their comrades, such as Best Jeanist, Kamui Woods, and MT. Lady, but as All Might entered the room he received a yellow boot to the side of his face, stumbling the unprepared hero. Toshi, I can't believe you've let this happen. As your teacher I am ashamed of you, and what would your master say to what you've allowed one villain to do? Gran Torino said, standing in front of the giant and tapping his foot angrily. All Might bowed swiftly, his legs slightly shaking. Forgive me, Gran Torino, I have no excuse, this is truly shameful of me, I beg your forgiveness. He said as Gran Torino huffed. I'll deal with you later, right now the city has need of us, they even went to the trouble of asking me to join, so it must be serious. Apologies Tsukauchi, please go ahead. Gran Torino said, walking back over to his seat. After the outburst Tsukauchi coughed, steering the meeting back on track. I've gathered all you heroes here to tell that we have a location for the villain's hideout. This lit a spark in all the gathered heroes here as Tsukauchi went on to explain. Thanks to the brave efforts of a UA student we were able to track a Nomu back to its base, but we also have reports of Killer Croc being spotted in the area near an establishment called the Mahjong Bar. Compounding on this, recent sightings of a man with burn scars across his body was also spotted going in and out of this underground bar. This is our chance to go on the offensive, heroes. While the villains celebrate their victory, we will attack and end their reign before they can do anything else. Tsukauchi said, slamming his fist into his palm. All the gathered heroes nodded, ready to take back the people's faith in them and bring this nightmare to an end. I'm coming for you, Bane, you'll get what you wanted soon. All Might said, clenching his fists. Kirishima had just gotten dressed and was attempting to sneak out of the hospital. He made his way outside his room, making sure the coast was clear. As he snuck down the halls he grit his teeth. He couldn't believe the others hadn't wanted to help in this. After all, Todoroki was their classmate too, but he couldn't get mad. They were technically doing the right thing in this situation, allowing the pros to do their job, but he wouldn't just sit by and do nothing. He'd gone to Yaoyorozu before she was discharged and practically begged her to make another tracking device for him. She'd asked for time to make up her mind, and not wanting to push her too hard he'd given it to her, and told her to meet him outside the hospital gates with her answer. Kirishima dashed out of the front entrance of the hospital unnoticed and quickly rounded the front gates and bumped into someone. He stumbled back looking to apologize until he saw who it was. Bakugo. There stood the former explosion user in front of him in jeans and a black t-shirt with red sneakers. Been a while, hasn't it, Kirishima? Bakugo asked, stepping up to him, hands in his pockets. Kirishima looked his friend in the eye and bit his lip. I'm sorry man, I tried to stand up for you, the teachers expelling you was bullshit. Did you come all the way to see me in the hospital? Kirishima asked, smiling at his friend's thoughtful act. It's fine, I knew that once it was known my quirk was gone I was going to get the boot. It was only the teachers' generosity that they waited as long as they did, but thanks for trying anyway. Bakugo said, punching Kirishima lightly before answering his question. No, I didn't. My damn phone wouldn't shut up with calls and texts telling me you were going to do something stupid. Bakugo said, holding up his phone showing the numerous calls and texts from their classmates. Kirishima frowned. Look man, I've got to do this, and if you came all the way here to stop me then you came here for nothing. Kirishima said, preparing himself for an argument. I didn't, I'm here to help. Even without my quirk I have to know if Bane is Izuku, and if he is then maybe I can get him to stop all this. I don't know if it was my bullying or him being quirkless, but whatever it was that turned him into this, I'm sure the Izuku I know is still in there somewhere. As the two teens talked they were joined by another. Yaoyorozu stepped out from around the corner and looked at the two. I was hoping that Bakugo was here to talk you out of this, but it seems that's not the case, and knowing how stubborn the two of you are you're going to go through with this whether I help or not, so I will go with you too, but only as a chaperone. If I see it's getting too dangerous I will get you out of there no matter what, understand? Momo said, taking her stance on the matter, and the two had no choice but to agree. With the matter settled the three made their way to the tracker destination after making a quick stop into a costume store for disguises. The trio came upon a small building. It looked abandoned, but the strength of the signal showed that their target was in there. Spotting a narrow alley next to the building the three slid into the crevasse and stopped beneath a high window. Bakugo, get on my shoulders and use these night vision goggles to see inside. Hiroshima said, crouching down, allowing Bakugo to climb his shoulders after taking the goggles from him, and looked inside. After scouring the inner scenery, he scowled. All I see is a bunch of trash beer cans, and old bentos. Someone comes here, but no sign of icy hot. Bakugo said, looking to the left, and once registering what was there, his eyes widened behind the goggles. Shit, there's 3 of those Nomu guys in here, but they look way different from the one at USJ. Is there one that looks like a maroon slime from those games? Momo asked, shuddering at the image of that monster chasing her through the woods. Bakugo nodded before they noticed a gathering on the street outside. Momo slid towards the entrance of the alley to take a better look at the 4 heroes there. MT Lady, Gang Orca, Best Jeanist and Tiger from the Cats, along with a large squadron of police. Momo gave a sigh of relief, glad she wouldn't have to prevent her 2 classmates from engaging if things went bad. We can head back now, the pros are here and we know that Todoroki is not here. We should get out of here as soon as possible. Momo explained to her disappointed yet relieved classmates, just as MT Lady activated her quirk, growing to full giant status and then bringing her foot down on the facility in an axe kick, caving a large portion of the building in. But that's when things got serious. Out of the smoke appeared Plasmus, who slithered up MT Lady's leg all the way to her neck before plastering himself across her face, creating a grisly mask of MT Lady's shocked expression. On the ground another creature appeared, this one looking like a living stone statue that rushed out of the rubble, locking hands with Gang Orca as the 2 powerhouses tried to overpower the other, until bullets rang out, mowing down the numerous police officers, somehow getting around their riot shields. Best Jeanist glared from behind his mask as he created a web of fiber, wrapping it around the last Nomu, whose fingers were gun barrels. There's only 3 of them. Regroup and take them down, Jeanist shouted, squeezing the Nomu tighter. Todoroki looked at Tamura and sat up straight. I have no intention nor need to join you to beat my father. I have my own way to show him up as a hero. There was the sound of rasping metal as Stain stepped forward, drawing his sword. You want to be a hero to show up your father? No, you are unworthy of that title. I've had enough, Shigaraki. Clearly your prize has no intention of joining us. It's time to cull him, Stain said, stepping forward with his sword as Tamura sighed. Yeah, I'm bored with him now. Do what you want, he said, walking away as there was a rapid knock at the door. Delivery. Immediately after that was said, the outer wall of the bar exploded inward as All Might crashed into the bar, standing tall in his Golden Age suit. Have fear, villains. Why? Because we are here, shouted All Might before quickly ducking, allowing Kamui Woods to shoot his tendrils into the bar and capture all but 2 of the villains, the exceptions being Stain, who quickly sliced through the branches, causing them to retract, and Bane flipped over a table, using it as a shield to block the groping vines and dodging to the side. Bane frowned underneath his mask as he watched as Edge shot quickly incapacitated Kurogiri. Well, there goes our exit strategy, Bane thought to himself as he began pumping his venom into his mask, as Dobby was also kicked into unconsciousness by some old pro, but all that seemed to drain away as he locked eyes with All Might. The 2 stared at each other over the expanse of the bar. The entire room could feel the tension as these 2 titans sized up the other, but before either could make a move, Stain jumped towards All Might. All Might, you are the only worthy hero, and I will gladly become a sacrifice to your heroic legacy. Come, All Might, kill me and show the world what it means to be a hero, Stain shouted, charging at All Might and drawing his sword, swinging it with blinding speed. But with just as much speed, All Might threw a punch, breaking the sword across his fist as the wind from his blow threw Stain back into the bar, crumpling the thick wood around himself. But Stain was far from done. He stood up, dropping his broken sword and drawing out 2K bar knives. That's no good, All Might, you have to kill me or nothing will change. All Might slowly turned his head to Todoroki. Todoroki, I need you to leave this place. Your father is outside waiting for you. Todoroki bit his lip as he imagined his dad's face outside. It made him sick to go out there to him, but he had no choice, he was only in the way here. Todoroki jumped from his chair as he ran towards the hole All Might had torn in the wall. Bane stepped forward, his blood was boiling. He'd beaten All Might before, but he wouldn't rest until he was broken before him. But as he stepped forward, Gran Torino slammed his foot into the side of Bane's head before bouncing off again. A kid like you is nothing more than a workout for me. Gran Torino said, bouncing off the walls and slamming into Bane repeatedly. Of course the blows weren't all that bad. His armor and sturdy frame made up for most of the impact. It was just getting his hands on the old man as Stain began slashing at All Might, his blades barely scratching the hero's costume. Stain slashed his knife towards All Might's face, who dodged aside and went for a right hook that Stain just as easily dodged the wind from his punch, shaking Kamui Woods' branches and the villains it held. "We're shaking like leaves on a tree here, man, literally," Jack said, squirming to try and touch Kamui's wooden skin, but the hero had got him in a rather difficult position. This is the strength of the #1 hero, the only man worthy of that title. I will be his sacrifice to a better hero world, Stain thought as he stabbed his knife forward, watching it break against All Might's chest as the hero went to grab him, narrowly missing as Stain ducked the blow and drove his spiked boot into All Might's stomach. It was like kicking a concrete wall as All Might drove his fist into Stain's stomach, slamming the villain deep into the floor, immobilized. Heroes don't kill villains. That's not what it means to be a hero, All Might said with a large smile across his face as Tamura shrieked. I hate you and that smile you wear. I hate everything about you. I'll kill you, All Might, Tamura shouted as portals began to appear around the bar and from them poured Nomu that began to attack the heroes and police force outside. This occurrence caused Gran Torino to shift his focus from repeatedly pounding Bane and gave the villain the opportunity to clothesline the elderly hero, sending him flipping through the air and slamming into the glass bottles displayed behind the bar. Damn, I thought you'd never give me an opening, Bane said, making his way towards All Might before he felt a familiar sensation in his mouth and watched as black vomit shot from all the villains' mouth. And as Todoroki ran from the building, he was also enveloped in a portal and whisked away to an unknown location. The only villain to remain was Stain. All Might looked around at the chaos around him and all he could do was shout his frustration. No, before he jumped off to the other hideout raid team's location, quickly followed by Gran Torino. Best Jeanist lay on his back, most of the thread of his sleeves gone, as he stared up at the monster before him. This man had shown up just as the tide was turning against the Nomu and nearly decimated his entire team. Even the Nomu had been caught in his opening attack. You truly are a pro, being able to get all your comrades out of the way of my attack. I commend your instincts, Best Jeanist. Too bad your quirk is not to my liking, All for One said as he floated down to the ground, looking at the hero beneath him. You're a monster, Jeanist said, moving his fingers to use his fibers, but was soon silenced by a point-blank air cannon blasting the hero into unconsciousness as several portals opened up, depositing his loyal followers and Todoroki. Behind the nearly destroyed wall stood Bakugo, Momo, and Kirishima. They had been there from the beginning, frozen solid in fear of All for One, and had only been able to watch as he destroyed the entire hero team with one attack. They soon saw his allies arrive, and there was also Todoroki standing in the rubble staring up at All for One. I'm glad to see you are all safe, Tamura, but it's time for you to go. Take your prize and leave this place, we don't have much tea. Right at that moment All Might appeared, slamming his fists into All for One's open palms. All for One, All Might shouted, glaring at the villain behind his mask as All for One drove All Might back with an air cannon, sending him flying into a nearby building. Master, we can't leave you here. If we fight together we can finally kill All Might, Tamura said, scrambling to be by All for One's side as the symbol of evil forcefully activated Kurogiri's quirk, but Tamura was gripped by Bane. Listen to him, Tamura. You are his future, you need to get out of here, Bane said as Tamura struggled in his grip. Get your hands up. Tamura crumpled onto Bane's fist as the masked man drove his fist into his gut, knocking him unconscious. Muscular, Croc, Leech, Toga, get everyone out of here through the portal, he shouted as his group began collecting Dabi, Magna and Kurogiri. Boss, what about you and the kid? Muscular asked, throwing Magna over his shoulder. I should stay and fight by your side, Muscular shouted as Bane shook his head. I'll be fine, just get Kurogiri up as soon as possible and have him open a portal for me and All for One, he said as he clapped his most loyal soldier on the shoulder. This is what all my planning has led up to. Just stick to the plan, he said, shoving Muscular through the portal as Jack hefted Tamura and Kurogiri after absorbing some of their strength. See ya on the other side, boss, and I swear I didn't mean that to sound as morbid as it did. Jack said, skipping through the portal, followed quickly by Croc, who was carrying Dobby, and was followed by Spinner, and twice. Toga stood at his side, pouting behind her mask as Bane looked down at her. "Go," he said simply as Toga stamped her foot. "Nope, I'm not going any." In an instant Bane detached the mouth of his mask and pulled Toga's down to deliver a key to her unsuspecting lips. "I can't cut loose with you around," he said, pushing her into the portal as it closed, and then looked at Todoroki and All for One. "Beat it, kid," he said, tossing the key he'd lifted from Tamura after knocking him unconscious as he stood next to All for One. "You were quite the disobedient one, aren't you, Bane?" All for One stated as he used one of his many quirks to watch All Might's approach back to the battlefield. Bane placed his mask back in place as he shrugged. "I've been waiting a long time for this, I wouldn't miss it for anything," he said as Todoroki struggled with his locks before opening them, feeling his quirks surge back under his control. He stared at the two villains standing there. "Why go through this only to let me go?" he asked as he slowly backed up. Bane looked at him behind his mask. "You were Tamura's toy. You don't mean anything to me," he said dismissively as All Might landed before the two villains in a large dust cloud. Wiping it aside, he noticed Todoroki free and All for One and Bane waiting for him. "Todoroki, leave. This is no place for you," All Might said, walking forward slowly, his gleaming smile gone, replaced with a dark frown. Todoroki nodded, running off and making a large iceberg to propel himself in the direction of his hidden classmates, who in turn began to take their leave except one. Katsuki stood behind the wall, peeking out around it at the three men about to do battle. "Bakugo, we have to go," Hiroshima harshly whispered to his friend, but Bakugo shook his head. "You guys go, I have to know if that's Izuku out there. I'll see this through to the end." Hiroshima wanted to drag his friend away, but he knew that this was something Bakugo had to do, and he had no right to get in his way. "I hope you find what you need in this," Hiroshima said, running off to meet up with Momo and Todoroki. "Once more we face each other on the battlefield, All Might, but this will be the last time." All for One shouted, preparing an air cannon before a punch caved in his left side. The taller villain looked to see Bane's fist in his side before blasting him with said air cannon, sending both apart. All Might's eyes widened, seeing this act of betrayal, as All for One gripped his injured side and Bane dropped his arms, revealing a jagged piece of bone in his hand, which he dropped to the ground. "Finally, I have you two right where I want you. You two are relics of a bygone era. Good, evil, no one cares. Such a dichotomy no longer prevails. All that matters is strength. Whoever is stronger is the one that's in the right. I'm Musudafu's reckoning, here to end the borrowed time you've all been living on," Bane shouted as All for One coughed, bloodying his mask. He stared at this boy, and for the first time he regretted choosing Tamura as his successor. He'd always had to look after Tamura, steadily pushing him down the path of villainy, but this boy, Izuku Midoriya, had chosen that path himself and was making strides down it on his own. "If only I had waited a bit longer," All for One thought to himself as he began laughing. "Well done, Bane. I always suspected this would happen, but I never thought you'd try to take me and All Might out at the same time. You must find this poetic All Might. Someone I trusted has come to destroy us both, but I will not go down easily. Bane, are you prepared?" All for One said as he stood up straight, letting his hand fall from his wound that was slowly closing. "A battle royale for the future of society, what a wonderful game." All for One shouted, pointing a hand at each of his opponents. "I only have one question. Is this who you want to be, Izuku Midoriya?" All Might asked, glancing repeatedly at Bane, not trusting All for One. Bane reached up and pulled back the top part of his mask, revealing his short-cut green hair and his burning emerald eyes. "Finally figured me out, did you? Not that it matters now. I'm no longer Izuku Midoriya, that boy died on that rooftop. I'm Bane now and forever," Izuku said, replacing his mask. "I'm sorry, young man, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I will take responsibility for driving you down this path, by taking you both into custody," All Might shouted, taking his stance. The three stood there locked in a three-way stare down until some nearby rubble collapsed, signaling the beginning of their battle. All three raced to the middle, their fists colliding in an explosive shockwave. Mirio Tagata stood at the window in Sir Night-Eye's office with arms crossed and dressed in his hero costume. "Sorry, sir, but I should be out there. I inherited All Might's power. I should be there fighting at his side." Night Eye sighed and cast his gaze towards Mirio. You're not ready, Mirio. Yes, you are the perfect vessel for one for all, but the person All Might is fighting is a monster in every sense of the word. You are a great hero, there is no argument there, but this is a foe only All Might can defeat. To be honest, you'd just get in the way. Even with his diminishing strength, All Might will win. I've seen the day of All Might's death and it is not now. Night Eye said calmly as he signed a few more documents. But sir, Mirio shouted, continuing to plead his case. Very well, Lemillion, if you can tell me one time that my visions have been wrong concerning anything, I will let you go to the battlefield. Night Eye said, not even looking at Mirio as he read over a piece of paper before signing it. Mirio bit his lip as he remained silent. They both knew Mirio couldn't name such a time, because nothing like that had ever happened. Night Eye's clairvoyance was 100% accurate every single time. Faced with that, Mirio had no choice but to give up and accept his mentor's order with no more resistance. I hope you're right, sir, he said as he left to change back into his civilian clothes. All Might jumped back from the three-way collision, narrowly avoiding an air cannon shot from All For One as Bane made a beeline for All For One, throwing a hard punch which the elder villain caught in his palm before speaking. Kinetic booster. All For One drove his fist into Bane's stomach, launching him backwards into the remains of a building which began collapsing shortly after. Seeing his chance, All Might dashed forward, driving his fist into the side of All For One's head, shattering the black mask covering his face. But not one to take such an attack. Lying down, All For One shot out his black and red fingers, embedding them into All Might and swinging him around in a large circle around himself before hurling him into the air towards a nearby helicopter, who was only saved by the speedy arrival of Gran Torino, who intercepted All Might's flying body and brought him back down to earth. You shouldn't have left me behind, Toshinori, Gran Torino said as they landed and watched a large I-beam rocket from the building Bane had been blasted into towards All For One, who used his impact recoil quirk to drive the I-beam back where it came from, narrowly missing Bane, who carrying another large girder jumped into the air and drove it down on All For One. You were persistent, aren't you, Bane? All For One said as he raised his hand preparing another impact recoil, but at the last second Bane spun in midair, hurling his makeshift missile at All Might and dropped to the ground before All For One could readjust his aim and drove his fist into the villain's stomach, followed quickly by his piston, forcing the villain backwards as blood shot from his mouth. All Might and Gran Torino dodged Bane's projectile and the number one hero closed the distance, throwing a punch that Bane countered with his own, another shockwave arcing out around the two as Bane's piston was blown off his arm by the shockwave. Both reared back as All Might shouted, "Texas Smash!" His fist rocketed forward towards Bane, who at the last second dodged the wind from the attack, shredding the chest of his suit as drove his elbow into All Might's jaw, knocking the hero back as Bane jumped away, letting All Might take the full brunt of All For One's air cannon. I know everything about you, All Might. Every move, every tell. I studied you religiously all my life. After all, you are the symbol of peace, the greatest hero in the world, Bane said, tearing off what was left of the upper half of his battle suit. All For One floated up into the air, looking down upon his two opponents. You know, All Might, as much as you hate me, I think I hate you more, but this boy, I dare say, has a hatred that trumps my own. You took away so much from me. Everything I tried to build, but you did something even crueler to him. You crushed whatever hope he had of building anything after seeing what he's become because of your words. How can you stand there and say you're a hero? All For One asked as Bane glared up at him. I'm not perfect, All For One. I make mistakes, I can't save everyone, I admit that, but right here right now I will make sure justice is served and both of you are made to pay for your crimes. That is my duty as the number one hero and the symbol of peace. All Might roared as Bane laughed, looking between the two of them. And that's why you two must die. Villains are evil. Heroes are righteous. These terms have always changed throughout the course of history. Those who sat at the top determines what's wrong and what's right. This very place is neutral ground. Justice will prevail, you say. But of course it will. Whoever wins this war becomes justice. He shouted, rushing All Might as the two exchanged blows, their fists colliding against the other. Bane came forward with a punch that All Might narrowly dodged, driving his fist into Bane's stomach, feeling several crunches against his knuckles. The villain coughed harshly, grabbing hold of All Might's fist before stepping forward, charging into All Might as he continued moving forward step after step until Bane was at a run, slamming All Might into the wall of the crater, a massive crack spreading out from the impact causing some of the wall to collapse around the two. All Might watched as Bane's wounds began to heal almost instantly. Regeneration, just like the first Nomu. I see, Izuku, you've truly given yourself over to that monster. I am sorry, young man. All Might thought to himself as he slammed his fist past Bane's defenses into his masked face, feeling the metal give and crack under his fist as he went to drive Bane back, but the villains, using his gruesome gloves, grabbed hold of All Might's arm, the glove shredding his skin as Bane kept himself from being knocked back, grappled All Might's arm and drove his forearm into All Might's elbow, snapping the joint there. All Might roared in pain as Bane swung All Might upwards toward All for One. California Smash. Even though the hero was racked with pain, he couldn't give in to it, and performing a frontal somersault, he hit All for One with a downward punch, driving both into the ground of the crater. Gran Torino looked as other heroes began arriving and instructed them to begin evacuating everyone as he watched the battle continue. Bane coughed up blood, wrenching his broken mask from his face, and looked at his two opponents. All Might kneeled upon All for One, his fist still in his face. You've passed it on, haven't you, All Might? You no longer hold one for all within you, and yet you still came here. To do what? All Might? Kill me again with the dying embers of the power I created. I don't know if I should be insulted you underestimate me, or congratulate you for having the guts to die at my hands, just like your precious master Nana Shimura. Would you like to know how she died, All Might? It was really quite gruesome. All for One spoke, watching All Might give into his anger and throw another punch at him. But at the last moment, All for One opened a portal, pulling Gran Torino in front of him, using him as a shield against All Might's fist, which crashed into the old man's face. All Might was shocked at what he'd done and immediately grabbed Gran Torino and jumped back, his other arm hanging limply at his side. Toshi, watch out! Gran Torino yelled, giving All Might enough time to dodge a large boulder Bane had hurled at him. All Might stared into the unmasked face of Bane, Izuku's green eyes burning with hatred, his teeth bared in a bloody rictus of rage. All for One rose from his crater, panting some. This fight had drug on long enough. His body was working to repair the damage he'd taken through the fight, but he was beginning to reach his limit. Playtime is over, it's time I end this. All for One spoke, holding up his right arm as it underwent a fearsome transformation. This is the ultimate combination of quirks I have at the moment. All of these quirks were chosen to kill you, All Might, to give you the most gruesome death possible. Spring-like limbs, kinetic booster ×4, strength enhancer ×3, proliferation, hypertrophy, rivet and spear-like bones. All for One's right arm was a massive mesh of over a dozen quirks. Even Bane was stunned by the appearance of All for One's arm. He growled in frustration. I was hoping to save this, but that was naive of me to think I wouldn't have to use this in a fight with these two. Bane thought to himself, grabbing a red patch from his pocket and peeled it free of its wrapper and slapped it against his chest as the red venom flowed into his body. He dubbed this venom as Overdrive. It was a super concentrated form of his venom, but it would leave him completely and utterly helpless after this healing factor or no. His body grew even larger, putting him over 7 feet tall, and with a loud roar Bane charged forward, the ground cracking with each footfall. All for One whipped his head to the side, seeing a monstrous Bane racing towards him. Bane's skin would tear open at each movement, revealing his enlarged muscles before being healed over by his quirk. Deep down this terrified All for One, reminding him of his fight with All Might 5 years ago, where the hero had charged him covered in blood and his guts flailing in the wind. No, you will not rob me of this, Bane. I've been waiting too long to let a young weed like you stop me. He shouted as he shot his fingers out, piercing Bane's flesh. It's time I take back what I so graciously gave you. All for One began to absorb Bane's healing factor into himself, but stopped. If he took his quirk back, it would immediately start to regenerate his body, and he simply didn't have the stamina to support such an aggressive healing. He'd die in the process. No, there's no way I can take it now. Bane was still advancing on All for One as he grabbed hold of All for One's fingers that were embedded in his chest and pulled the villain down towards him. Unwilling to go down without a fight, All for One reared back, ready to slam his transformed fist into Bane, but as he was pulled forward, All Might jumped forward and punching towards All for One with his most powerful attack. United States of Smash. All for One had a split-second decision to make. He could either continue his attack on Bane or shift it to counter All Might. Making his choice, All for One turned and slammed his transformed fist into All Might's, the two attacks clashing as a massive tornado erupted around the three as All Might and All for One clashed, but it seemed like All Might would lose this conflict of wills, his arms spurting blood as the bones were being crushed under All for One's massive fist. Taking this moment to act, Bane drove his gauntleted fist into the side of All for One's head, his piston shooting out, punching into the villain's head and out the other side. All for One's body crumpled as All Might drove his fist forward, sending his enemy's corpse across the battlefield, his fingers retracting from Bane's chest as the wound immediately closed shut. The tornado had forced the newscopter to fall to the ground. Thankfully, the crew was unharmed and within moments were once more filming the aftermath of the two clashing attacks. Zooming in, they could see an unmasked Bane and All Might both facing each other. For the first time, Bane's face was visible to all who say the broadcast. It shocked all to see how young Bane was, and to think someone his age had caused all this was frightening. Bane stared at All Might's true form, nothing but skin and bones, but Bane still had a job to do. The venom he'd used was a last-ditch effort to take them out, but his body would never be the same after its effects wore off. Bane could already feel the drug wearing off as he stepped towards All Might, who'd shrunk back to his original form, but was still standing tall as he faced Bane, who was issuing crimson steam from his body. "You've chosen your path, Izuku Midoriya. If this is the man you want to be, then do what you must, but for what it's worth, I am sorry if my words drove you to this." Bane stood before All Might, looking down at the weakened hero. "We both know I have to kill you now, All Might," Bane said as he pulled back his blood-stained fist and stepped forward, driving it towards All Might before an unknown person dashed in between the hero and Bane. "Katsuki Bakugo. Don't do it, Izuku. This isn't you. Please, you have to stop. None of this is All Might's fault. It's mine," Katsuki shouted, staring up at his old friend and the monster he'd become. "We both idolized All Might. Both of us strove to be heroes, but you deserve to be a hero. This isn't the Izuku I knew. No, young Bakugo, you have to get out of here," All Might shouted, coughing up blood as he fell to a knee. Bane looked down at Katsuki with dismissive eyes. "The Izuku you knew. You never knew me. You really do think everything is about you, don't you? You know I actually feel bad about what I did to you," Bane stated, giving Katsuki the impression his friend was remorseful. "No, it's okay, I kind of dare," Katsuki said before he was interrupted. "Make no mistake, it's not because I regret crushing you like a worthless bug, it's because you simply weren't worth the meager effort it took to do so. I was childish in wanting to get back at a pathetic creature such as you. I see that now," Bane said simply before backhanding Katsuki out of the way, his rough gloves stripping several layers of flesh from Katsuki's cheek. Bane grabbed hold of All Might, forcing him to both his knees and turning him around backwards as red steam began to erupt from his body. "Goodbye, symbol of peace," Bane said as Katsuki watched Bane drive his knee into the upper part of All Might's back, hearing a sickening crunch as All Might's ribcage shattered, puncturing his lungs and heart. Blood gushed from All Might's mouth, splattering the ground in front of him before his lifeless body fell face first into All Might. Katsuki shouted as his hands heated up, producing an explosion as Katsuki stood up, tears running down his face as his hands sizzled. "Izuku, you bastard. I'll make you pay for this," Katsuki shouted as Bane shrunk down completely and began to collapse. Seeing his chance, Katsuki dashed forward, ready to blow Izuku's head off until he collided with a large hand. Bane smirked as he was hefted by two arms and looked at his trump card. "Nice timing, Asura," Bane said to the Nomu standing before a shocked Katsuki. It sported 6 arms and a series of glowing green veins across his body, each being pumped full of venom. This was Bane's greatest Nomu. He'd poured all his knowledge into making this creature before him. This Nomu possessed the ability to emit pure energy from its body, whether from its hands, eyes, even its mouth. He'd replaced its blood with pure venom, actually creating an organ to produce his concoction. This was his ultimate Nomu, aptly named Asura. "Yes, Master," the Nomu spoke before releasing a large blast of pure energy from the palm that was holding Katsuki's, blasting the child back as a portal was opened behind the Nomu and its creator. Without waiting for a command, the Nomu jumped into the portal, which closed soon after, leaving the destroyed battlefield with the bodies of the now deceased greatest hero and villain. At one of Fat Cat's warehouses, Tamura was pacing back and forth as he waited for Bane to walk through with his master, and soon enough Bane was brought through the portal, by a six-armed Nomu carrying the exhausted villain. "Put me down, Asura." Doing as told, Asura sat Bane on his feet, only for Toga to wrap her arms around his waist to stabilize the young man as Tamura hurriedly approached. "Where's Master? You said you'd bring him back with you, so where is he?" Tamura shouted, receiving a number of glares from Bane's group. Toga gripped Bane tighter to keep from slashing Tamura's throat. Bane stood as tall as he could as he looked at the young man before him. "He's dead. I killed him," Bane announced to the room at large. Kurogiri, who was still groggy from being knocked out by Edgeshot, looked to Bane shocked as he watched Tamura give into his rage with a yell and reach forward towards Bane. But even in his weakened state, Bane was not one to be underestimated as he punched Tamura in the throat, causing the Decay villain to choke before Bane grabbed the top of Tamura's head and his chin. "I've wanted to do this for so long," Bane stated gleefully as he twisted Tamura's head upside down, his chin pointing towards the ceiling and his hair hanging against his chest. "Master RRRRR," was Tamura's last word as he fell to the floor. Bane looked at the gathered villains, noticing Jack's hand on the back of Kurogiri's head, sapping his strength. "All for One is dead. Tamura is dead. The League of Villains belongs to me. This city belongs to us. Anyone who has a problem with that can either leave or step forward. This is the dawning of a new era, our era. Stand with me and this city will be your playground. This night the symbol of peace died at my hands. There's no one to stop us now, and all those who try will die just the same. Now who will stand with me?" Bane asked. He was barely staying conscious, but this needed to be said before he allowed himself to rest. Of course Muscular, Jack, Killer Croc, Magna and Toga, who hadn't left his side since he arrived, stood behind him. "Stain saw you as a comrade in his war on false heroism and saw your convictions as worthy, knowing that I will stand beside you," Dobby said as Spinner and himself stood next to the growing crowd around Bane. Bane cast his haggard eyes toward Twice, Compress and Kurogiri. These three were the only ones he was worried about. After all, they were Tamura's men, chosen by him, and Bane had just murdered their leader in front of their very eyes. Mr. Compress was the first to step up, giving a polite cough as he took off his hat and bowed. "It would be my pleasure to serve under you, Master Bane. You offer a much larger stage for me to perform," he stated, standing at his full height and replacing his hat as he walked over to him. Twice stood rubbing his chin for a moment before joining Bane's followers and speaking. "I don't want to join you. Of course I'll lend you my considerable strength, be grateful," the copy quirk user shouted out as all eyes turned to the exhausted Kurogiri. He didn't know what to do. He hadn't had any special feelings for Tamura, but he had been important to his master All for One, and Bane had just admitted to killing them both. He could teleport out of here, but Bane just stated he'd take this entire city as his, and Kurogiri had no doubt with All Might gone that he could. He stood shakily for a moment before placing a hand on his chest. "I am at your service, Bane," Kurogiri stated as Bane grinned widely. "I'm glad to hear it, Kurogiri. Now everyone, it's time we go our separate ways for the moment. We will meet again soon, but for now go and rejoice. Musutafu is yours," he shouted as all the villains gave wide grins, reveling in the newfound freedom Bane had just gifted them as they left. Bane leaned heavily on Toga as they and his Nomu were the only ones left in the warehouse. "Asura, keep an eye out for anyone who approaches here," Bane commanded as the six-armed giant left the building to do just that. Bane looked down at Toga, who began helping him towards the upstairs office in the warehouse where Bane collapsed on the couch. Toga couldn't help but admire Bane's entire body. He was covered in so much blood and his eyes were bloodshot as ragged breaths escaped his mouth. Most of his suit was gone except his boots and pants. She bit her lip, barely containing her lust for the man in front of her. Bane could sense Toga staring at him and sighed, holding out an arm for her as she lay on his chest, listening to his heart beat heavily against her smaller frame. "You really did it, didn't you, Bane?" she asked, her golden eyes staring into his emerald ones. Bane coughed a little as he looked up at the ceiling. "Of course I did. Bane doesn't fail. I'll bring this city to its knees, and break every hero who comes before me." Toga rubbed her cheek against his chest, smearing it with the blood he'd shed before keying Bane. Katsuki was pulled from some of the rubble that had collapsed on him as he was blasted back by that Nomu thing. He looked into the face of Tiger before looking at the gathered heroes who stood around the collapsed form of All Might. Katsuki's eyes widened as he felt the burn of tears stream from his eyes. No, it can't be. No, 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 no. Katsuki shouted as he raced forward, seeing his nightmare was real. There lay All Might in his true form, dead next to his greatest enemy All for One. Izuku did this, he really did it. He killed All Might. Katsuki fell to his knees as he looked at his greatest hero dead on the ground. It was at that moment Katsuki understood. There are some things a hero can't do. If All Might had killed All for One before, he wouldn't have had to go through this again, and if Death Arms had fought to kill Izuku when they met, All Might would still be alive. No, heroes were inefficient. They were only a half measure that the world could no longer abide, not with people like Izuku out there. Katsuki stood up and gave one last look to All Might before turning around and walking away. I can't be a hero like you, All Might. The world needs something more aggressive. Gran Torino looked down at his former student before kneeling and stroking Toshi's hair. You did your best, Toshi. No one can say otherwise. You succeeded where even Nana failed. You put an end to All for One. She'd be proud of you. Endeavor stood above his rival, looking down at the true form of the #1 hero. He was filled with so many different emotions right now he couldn't find the words to speak. All he could do was stare. As Endeavor stood there, his phone went off. He reached into his pocket and answered by reflex as he heard the crying of his only daughter Fuyumi. Dad, something happened to Mom. Endeavor's mind kick-started at the mention of Rei. What happened, Fuyumi? He asked emotionlessly, finding that his feet had been moving on their own, taking him away from the tragic death site. She's missing. Apparently someone pulled the fire alarm at the hospital and in the evacuation she went missing, but it's being said she killed an orderly. Endeavor sighed. His wife was mentally unstable, and now it's come out she killed someone. Damn that woman, he growled. I'm on my way home. Has Shoto made it there yet? He asked as he found the car he'd used to get here. No, do you think he's still in danger? Fuyumi asked as Endeavor climbed into the car. I doubt it, but I'll look for him. I doubt he's gotten far. Keep trying his cell, but do not tell him about Rei. I'll do that. Endeavor commanded before hanging up as the car started making its way through traffic. Mitsuki Bakugo and her husband were staring at the TV as a news reporter took stock of the situation. As of now, it has been confirmed that All Might, the symbol of peace, is dead. The reporter claimed, tears running down her face as she fought through her grief to continue her report. At that moment there was a rapid knocking at the front door. Mitsuki jumped slightly, her concentration broken as she went to answer the door, thinking it might be Katsuki. Her son had left home earlier that night, saying he was going to visit one of his friends in the hospital. Having seen the news about the training camp incident, Mitsuki had been more than happy to see him going out on his own, but that was hours ago and she had been worried since. Mitsuki opened the door and her eyes widened in fear as she stared down the muzzle of a gun. Before she could scream, the gun went off as she stared into a pair of green eyes and a grisly smile, hearing far-off laughter. Jack was walking down the nearly deserted streets of Musudafu carrying a bloody tarp over his shoulder. As he smoked a cigarette, alongside him was his unofficial partner Killer Croc, who was hissing angrily. Jack sighed. Look, I know you're pissed about what happened, Croc, but we had to retreat. It wouldn't have done us any good to stick around and fight. We would have been killed, and that means Bane would have been going in blind, because you know the boss isn't going to take this shit lying down. Jack growled as he noticed the frightened eyes of the citizens in their homes, but also the eyes of the thugs and criminals prowling the streets like scavengers looking for their next meal, but they knew better to challenge any of Bane's men. It's not right. We should revenge our compat friend. Croc said, his speech slightly broken as he tried to use larger words than he was used to. In the past year, Croc has done his best to up his speech level, and for the most part he was understandable. Don't sweat it, big guy. Like I said, we'll get ours. Nobody s with Bane's guys, and old Bird Nose is going to learn that firsthand. This city belongs to Bane and has been for the past year. Everybody knows that, so it's best to fall in line or get broken. Jack growled, taking out his cigarette and flicking it into a nearby trash can, watching its contents catch on fire as they stepped up to the gates of Ua. He leaned forward, kicking the door several times before the door was pulled open by two large henchmen. "Thanks, boys," he said, walking in. Jack smiled as he looked at the destroyed sections of the school. "Man, that was one hell of a fight, but we won in the end, didn't we?" he asked as he gathered spit in his mouth and shot it out upwards, where it landed on one of the several bodies hanging above the entryway. Namely Smentos, Vlad, King, and the former principal Nezu, where Jack's spit landed. Croc and Leech walked into the building, heading up the stairs to the principal's office. They passed a door where feminine screams could be heard, only for the door to be opened and a bloodstained Toga to walk out. "Having fun there, Blondie?" Jack asked as Toga wiped her mouth and smiled. "Of course, Midnight is a real toughie, but I'm pretty sure I'll break her soon. It's a good thing her boyfriend got away, otherwise my fun would have ended a long time ago." "What's in the bag?" Toga asked, pointing at the sack over Jack's shoulder, watching the redhead's face darken. "You'll see," he said simply as they continued on there to the principal's office and knocked. Hearing a voice telling them to enter, they stepped inward, seeing Bane curling a barbell in one hand as he stared out the window. They couldn't see the exact weight, but judging from number of weights on each side they were sure it was 1,000 pounds, if not more. "How did it go, Leech?" Bane asked, turning around as he dropped the weight, hearing it crash and embed itself into the floor. "Not good, boss. Overhaul isn't going to play ball with us anymore. Magna tried to persuade him and this happened," Jack said, laying his bloody tarp on one of the couches in the office and revealed a pair of legs dressed in Magna's trademark stylish pants and shoes. Bane's face was emotionless as he looked at the remains of his loyal soldier. "I'm sorry, boss, this was our fault. Croc and I were there, but we couldn't stop it from happening. We decided to just take Magna and come back here to report." Bane raised his hand to stop Jack's apology. This was Magna's fault and his alone. He should have sized up his opponent better. "You two did the right thing, but as foolish as Magna was, his death will not go unavenged. Chisaki has been skirting my authority for a while now, but with this he's declared war on me and we will answer in kind." "What did you find out?" Bane said, walking back to his desk and sitting behind it. On the desk was a full map of the city. It had been divided into sections by Bane himself. Each part was ruled over by one of his lieutenants. One of them having been Overhaul. It had taken some time to bring this city under his heel, but with the death of All Might the city had been primed for his takeover. Of course there were those who resisted his takeover and they were dealt with, but Bane was not foolish enough to believe that he had eradicated every heroic presence in the city. Eraserhead, Present Mike, 13, and Lemillion were still out there. Bane was broken from his thoughts as Jack began speaking. "He's in some kind of fancy house, but there's more to it underground, though we didn't get that far. He also has some kind of lowly fetish. He keeps a little girl with him. She has a horn coming out of the right side of her forehead. From the looks of her, he enjoys torturing her. She's apparently financially important to him. Maybe he's pimping her out or something," Leech said, scratching the back of his head as Croc growled next to him. "Oh yeah, Croc took a liking to her. Kindred spirits or something like that," Leech said as he looked to Bane. "Fine then. He killed one of ours. We'll take something from him besides his life, of course. We'll launch an attack on Chisaki's base. We'll burn it to the ground and parade Chisaki's mangled corpse through the streets." Bane roared as he looked at the remains of his fallen comrade. "Take care of Magna, would you? Then have someone gather my lieutenants for a meeting today. Anyone who doesn't show will deal with me," Bane said, to which Leech and Croc both nodded. "Least we can do for her, I suppose, and sure thing, boss, we'll get someone on it right away," Jack said, picking up the tarp and walking out. Bane looked over at Toga and could see the hatred spilling from her in waves. Her eyes were dark and her fists clenched at her sides, her long hair shivering as her body shook with rage. "I know, Magna was a good soldier. She will be missed, but we can't let ourselves be clouded by anger. When we strike, it will be precise and just let me be the one to kill him, Bane. I want to see his blood splattered across the room as the light drains from his eyes." Bane shook his head. "As Magna's leader, it's my responsibility to avenge his death." "I'm sorry, Toga," he said, stroking her hair as she sighed. "Fine, I guess, but I want to watch." Bane smirked. "I'd have it no other way," he said, keying her as he picked her up in his arms. Lemillion stood on a rooftop with a pair of binoculars and grit his teeth. "Look at him, he thinks he's won. but he's wrong, this city still has heroes in it. At his side stood Eraserhead. The man had aged a lot in this last year, his long hair taking on a gray tinge and his right eye was milky, indicating his blindness in that eye. He's wiped out most of the heroes in this city, and those that didn't die ran. The fall of UA was the last straw. We couldn't hold the city with them in control of UA. He's reduced this place to a prison for the innocent, and a feeding ground for every criminal that comes here, but even so he's not the only thing killing this city. Shisaki, the Yakuza boss, is trafficking his quirk killer bullets all over Japan, but as long as he's in Bane's shadow no one can stop him. Then there's this Joker character and her partner Killer Frost. We have no idea what she's after. She kills heroes and criminals indiscriminately. Enough. I get it, things are bad, but we can't give up. First things first, we need to take care of Shisaki. His quirk killer needs to be shut down before we can deal with Bane. Lemillion stated as he turned around, sliding off the roof, followed by Aizawa. I know you don't want to hear this, but maybe we should ask him for help with this. Aizawa said, knowing the reaction his suggestion would get, but it would be irrational not to voice it anyway. Lemillion turned on his heel, his blue eyes burrowing into Aizawa's. No, I refuse to employ that maniac in a licensed hero operation. He's no hero, he's not even a vigilante, he's a ruthless murderer and belongs in a cell right alongside Bane and Shisaki. Lemillion shouted as he made his way through the myriad of alleyways. Aizawa sighed and shook his head. Maybe a maniac is what we need, fight fire with fire and all that. Aizawa thought, walking after Lemillion. Spinner swung his sword at the figure encroaching on him as it ducked under his sword and punched him in the stomach. Of course his hide was thick, dulling the pain of the blow some as he spun his sword in his hand and stabbed downward to pierce his adversary, only to find him gone and a small grenade left in his place before it blew up in his face, knocking his sword from his hands and choking him with smoke as he received a kick to his chin, slamming him out of the smoke and into a wall. Spinner could tell his jaw was broken as he looked through his tears into the eyes of a criminal's nightmare, Blast Lung. This man had hair stylized into spikes and large brass knuckles on his fists with spiked boots. He also wore a bomber jacket covering a bright red shirt crisscrossed with grenades and a twin holster belt with one of the guns in its holster, the other in Blast Lung's hand. Found you, you shitstain. Blast Lung growled before firing 2 shots into both of Spinner's legs, the villain yelling out before the hot barrel of the gun was slammed into his open mouth. Don't worry, I'll send your friends to hell right after you. Blast Lung said as he pulled the trigger, the hollow point bullet exploding out of the back of Spinner's head, coating the wall with his blood. Blast Lung stood up, looking in the direction of Ua. I'll send all of you to hell. You hear me, Izuku? I'm going to blow you all away. Blast Lung said as he dropped down from the building. After all, the night was young and he had an entire list of thugs and criminals to spend the night with. Bane sat at the UA conference room table, immersed in his thoughts. Today's the anniversary of when I took this city. All Might's death made this possible. Of course there were some hiccups, namely the war for UA. Shisaki had been instrumental in that respect. If not for his quirk killer, the battle would have been much harder than it was, but Bane had always known Shisaki would bare his fangs at him. After all, Shisaki is a king from a different time. 2 apex predators can't coexist in such a small territory. Somebody has to be the king and somebody has to be the horse. That's just the way life is. He said to the empty room as he was transported back to that battlefield a year ago. Flashback. Bane was sitting up in bed and watching the news. Of course, on every channel was some memorial to All Might. Even the Americans were mourning the loss of the symbol of peace. He smirked as he stroked Toga's hair as she slept next to him. The reporter was speaking on the screen, barely containing his grief. Today we mourn the death of Toshinori Yagi, better known as All Might. While defending our city from evil, he was killed in action by Bane, who we now know as Izuku Midoriya, a child who'd been reported missing earlier this year. Bane smacked his lips in displeasure. He'd rather have kept his anonymity, but that was more a personal preference than a necessity. He pulled back the covers and slid out of bed. It was time to get to work. Since All Might's death, his influence in the underworld had grown vast, and even though he wasn't in the spotlight himself, his army was doing their job. Every day another hero office fell to his minions, but the last bastion of hero society stood on a hilltop near the city, Ua. It had to be brought down. When that happened, the city would be broken and it'd kneel before him. He turned on the shower and slid inside, looking at the scars on his chest. He smirked at the reminder of All for One, where his fingers had pierced his chest. Even with his healing factor, they never did heal properly, turning into 4 dots surrounding his heart in a square. A small price to pay, I suppose, he said simply as he saw the shower curtain be pulled back and Toga entered soon after. Did I wake you? He asked as she wrapped her arms around his lower back, pressing her beeps against him. He shuddered some as he began to wash himself. Nope, I was awake even before you got out of bed, but I didn't want you to stop petting me, she said honestly as she pulled back, snatching his washcloth from him and scrubbing his back. What's a small price to pay? She asked. Bane shrugged. Anything, everything depending on what you're buying, he said as he turned around towards her and began washing her hair. It's time, sweep the board, he said simply before keying her. Principal Nezu stood in his office. The campus grounds were completely deserted. He'd sent all the students home some time ago. With the city in the state it was in, it seemed laughable to continue teaching heroics here. Shiketsu had gracefully accepted the massive influx of students with no qualms. He heard the door open and someone rush in. He looked, seeing Present Mike as he ran across the room to the phone and pressed speaker. Hello Principal Nezu, I hope you're doing well today. Principal Nezu took a deep breath before speaking. I'm doing quite fine, Bane, and how are you? Bane chuckled over the speaker. I respect that. Even though we're enemies we can still be civil. I was hoping that was the kind of man you are, which is why I'm calling and giving you this one chance. Abandon Ua before tomorrow morning and there need be no bloodshed. Present Mike fumed in the corner before shouting. You bastard, you want our school and for us to just leave without putting up a fight. You can take your offer and shove it up your a. Present Mike, that is enough. This is a civil conversation and I would like it to remain that way if you please. Nezu said, holding up his paw to silence his subordinate. Forgive the outburst, Bane, but you must admit that this is a rather ludicrous demand. Ua is the #1 hero school in all of Japan. If we were to simply hand it over to you, what kind of message would that send? Think of our position and you'll know we can't surrender this place to you, though we do appreciate the courtesy call. Bane gave a small chuckle. Well, we all have our crosses to bear. I look forward to seeing you on the battlefield, Mr. Principal. The call was disconnected shortly after, the tension from the room ebbing slowly as Nezu rested against his chair. Present Mike, raise the threat level to maximum and tell all faculty on the grounds to come see me, then place calls to every remaining hero office in the city and ask them for assistance. Present Mike nodded before exiting the office. So it's come to this, has it? Very well, then I will give it my all as the principal of this school, and as a hero. The faculty was gathered in the auditorium of the school, the meager amount that remained, bolstered by the appearance of several heroes, most notable of them being the current #1 hero Endeavor. Principal Nezu stood at the podium on the stage and gave a small cough to gain everyone's attention. First off, to all the staff who've stayed this long, you have my eternal gratitude, and to the heroes who responded to our calls, thank you all for coming. Now there's no right way to say it, so I'll just be blunt. Bane is coming here in the morning to take this school by force, for what reason I do not know. He gave me an out and I selfishly refused it, so for that I am sorry, but I won't relinquish this school to a murderer, nor will I force any of you to fight for it on my behalf. Any who want to leave feel free to do so, but I will be staying no matter what. There was a pervading silence before everyone stood up. Sir, I believe I speak for everyone when I say that it would be an honor to fight alongside you. Spoke Midnight as a resounding cheer went off around the room. Nezu smiled at all his friends and co-workers. Thank you all. The next morning came swiftly, and on that day the sun rose on a horde of villains marching down the street towards Ua, led by Bane and his enforcers. Bane was dressed in a suit similar to the one destroyed in his fight with All Might and All for One. On his shoulder rode Toga in her blood-stained costume, and Muscular on his left dressed in jeans and topless, his prosthetic eye with its black and blue striped pattern gleaming in the sunlight. Leech, who stood next to him, seemed even more excited. He dressed in a green t-shirt and black basketball shorts with white sneakers. Oh man, this is gonna be sweet. Next to him, Killer Croc snapped his jaws together several times in excitement. As they neared the school, they saw a line of heroes standing there with more on top of the surrounding wall. Play this. Watch. V equals HXQW1EQ0 IP4. First and foremost stood Endeavor, his suit blazing as he stared down Bane and his army. Bane smirked behind his mask, clicking the release for his venom as it flooded his body, increasing his size as he stopped walking, his army stretching out behind him. I just want you to know that I am grateful to you all for staying and defending your school. It wouldn't be nearly as devastating to the people of this city if they didn't see you all crushed before our might. Bane shouted out as Endeavor laughed. You cocky bastard, I will burn you all to ash. Endeavor shouted, releasing a massive torrent of flame towards Bane, only for it to be countered by a beam of pure energy. The two attacks collided and exploded in between the two forces. Bane swiped the smoke from in front of him. Thank you, Asura, now take care of him. The six-armed Nomu jumped forward towards the flame hero, the two clashing in midair as Bane's forces advanced, surging forth like a massive tidal wave breaking around Bane, who slowly walked forward. Plasmus, infiltrate the school and kill anyone inside. Nearby, the amorphous Nomu gave a squeal of confirmation before sliding into a nearby manhole and using the sewer pipes began to invade UA's plumbing system and came up through a shower drain in the girls' locker room. After reforming, Plasmus made his way out of the locker room and into the hall. Spotting the hero recovery girl, he shot out his tentacles, catching the elderly woman by surprise and wrapping around her, crushing her in his slimy grip as she struggled in vain to release herself from its clutches. Cinderblock, lead the charge. I want that door open by the time I get there. Bane commanded as the stone Nomu began charging, building up speed as he was peppered with bullets by Snipe, before slamming into a wall of concrete created by Smentos, who began reforming the concrete in front of the school to form a long gorge in front of it. I will not let any villains enter this school, he shouted before he was shot in the head, falling dead as his quirk immediately stopped. Nice work, Deadshot. Make sure those bullets we got from Shisaki are worth every penny. Bane said as he smiled. The Nomu with guns for fingers was on a rooftop over 2 miles away with an arsenal of quirk killer bullets and was using them to snipe heroes from far off. With no more concrete in its way, Cinderblock slammed his fingers underneath the wall of concrete in front of it and uprooted it from the ground before tipping it over the gorge Smentos had created, using it as a bridge and running at full speed slammed into UA's barrier. The barrier gained a large dent, but nothing more before Cinderblock began slamming its fists into it again and again as it heard the approach of Muscular, Jack, and Killer Croc. Never send a Nomu to do a man's job, Muscular said, cracking his knuckles as he approached, hearing Leech yawn to his side. Come on, Muscular, he's doing his best here, man. At least I assume it's a he, be an ugly chick otherwise. Jack said, laughing as both he and Muscular reared back and punched the doors open, and as the barrier fell, 2 objects rocketed out of the broken door. Muscular was wrapped in wooden restraints before being drawn into the UA courtyard and slammed into the ground by Kamui Woods. At the same time, a binding cloth was wrapped around Jack as he received a knee to the face, knocking him backwards across the makeshift bridge into the crowd of encroaching villains. There in the doorway stood Eraserhead before jumping to the side as Present Mike gave off a power screech, bursting the eardrums of all the villains within range. As Present Mike took a breath, preparing another yell, 2 bullets crashed together near his head, narrowly missing the pro hero. He looked up and frowned. What the hell, Snipe? Friendly fire, really? Criticized Present Mike as he dodged behind one of the remaining barriers created by Smentos. Snipe was panting hard as he fired off another bullet, saving Vlad King from another bullet. What the hell is with that thing? Snipe growled, narrowly dodging another shot. It has to be 2 miles away at least, and yet it can target us precisely. It's taking everything I have just to keep everybody alive, Snipe said, firing off another bullet, saving Midnight this time as he caught sight of Smentos's dead body. I'm sorry, Smentos, I should have been faster, he said as he watched a bullet ricochet off of several surfaces heading straight for Hound Dog. Shit, Snipe fired, causing the Nomu's bullet to veer off course, and instead of piercing through Hound Dog's heart, it was knocked off course, hitting his shoulder. The dog hero dropped to a knee before jumping back from the group of villains he'd been engaging in. Nice work, hero, Dobby whispered to Snipe as he unleashed a large burst of flame right in Snipe's face, knocking the hero off UA's wall, falling to the ground below. Dobby jumped down into UA's courtyard, looking at the chaos as the heroes were steadily pushed back, forced to retreat further within their walls. Dobby noticed the front door of the school open and a large platoon of robots rolled out, opening fire on the villains. Dobby shook his head. Of course they were only using rubber bullets, so it didn't matter. They really should get serious, he said, walking towards the squad of robots. Bane stepped forward, placing himself in UA's courtyard, and smiled. This had been his dream for so long. Stepping onto these grounds as a student, a future hero, but he knew that stepping foot here as a conqueror was so much more fulfilling. He turned as he felt Toga move on his shoulder, throwing a knife to slice through Midnight's whip. The R-rated hero Midnight, right? He spoke before raising his hand, having Aizawa's scarf wrap around it instead of his body. And of course Eraserhead, he said, turning towards Aizawa as Toga jumped from his shoulder to confront Midnight. I know you're not a talkative guy, so let's just get to it, Bane said, running towards Aizawa, reaching out towards him only for the Eraser hero to dodge to the side, using a palm strike against Bane's side before throwing out his scarf and wrapping it around Bane's neck, looking to drag the villain down into a kick, but Bane was also a skilled combatant, going with the pull only to grip Aizawa's leg, stopping his kick. Aizawa grunted in pain at the intense grip his leg was in, but fought through it and twisting to catch Bane in the head with another kick, only for the villain to catch his other leg and raised Aizawa above his head before slamming him into the ground on his back. You should have kept your distance, Aizawa. Grappling is my specialty, Bane said, looking at the hero on the ground as he coughed up some blood. Shota, Midnight screamed, trying to get past Toga only to be stopped by a throwing knife embedded an inch in front of her foot. You've got a date with me, Midnight, Toga yelled happily, slicing at her with her clawed gloves, narrowly missing the agile heroine, who dodged to the side and whipped out a kick, catching Toga in her mask, shattering the teeth in it, driving the plastic shards into Toga's face, who screamed in pain, throwing a knife and slicing open Midnight's thigh. Bane turned from Aizawa, looking at Toga, and began advancing on the injured Midnight before Aizawa wrapped him in his scarf fully. You and I aren't done, Bane. Aizawa drew his large knife and sliced both of Bane's Achilles tendons, causing the villain to drop to his knees. It's over, Bane. Aizawa's scarf snapped around Bane's bulging muscles as he broke free and turned around, striking Aizawa across the face with his glove and knocking the hero into the gorge created by Smentos. No, Shota, Midnight said, trying to run over to the gorge only to receive a knife in both of her legs, dropping her to the ground as Toga stood over her, the villainous, face drenched in her own blood and holding a knife in both hands. I'm going to cut you to pieces as slowly as possible, Toga declared, driving her knives into Midnight's body again and again. Bane looked to make sure Toga was all right before turning back to the front door of UA that had been burned open by Dobby as he burned away the robotic guards. Looking around one final time, Bane took notice of his war, and as expected it was going in his favor. Jack was holding on to Hound Dog, draining his strength before killing him as Muscular walked away from a broken Kamui woods. Smiling, Bane walked into the school and made his way through it, finding traces of plasmas inside before he found his Nomu smeared across a long stretch of hallway, and standing before him was a guy no more than a few years older than himself. I can't say I recognize. Bane watched as the guy in front of him disappeared, only to receive a punch to the right side of his face, knocking him through a wall into a classroom. Jumping to his feet, Bane looked around, seeing his opponent gone once again before being uppercutted off his feet and falling to the ground. He could taste blood in his mouth as he looked up at the hero in front of him. My name is Lemillion, and I am the inheritor of One for All. I will defeat you, Izuku Midoriya. Bane stood up on his feet, looking at this hero, doing his best to try and analyze what was going on here. He inherited One for All, which explains the strength, but how was he moving around so quickly? Teleportation, invisibility, what could it be? Bane thought to himself as he saw Lemillion drop into the ground. Phasing, Bane thought before he felt a kick in his back, driving him through two other classrooms before he managed to stop himself by dragging his hands along the ground. I don't get it. He has three quirks all for one, phasing and teleportation. Bane stood up, looking around, taking stock of his surroundings, looking for any sign of Lemillion. Just think, he can phase through things, but there has to be a moment when he needs to hit me and make himself solid. I just have to hold out for that moment, Bane thought, backing up slowly to the blackboard as he felt Lemillion appear behind him. He turned, throwing a punch only for it to pass through Lemillion's head as he slammed his fist into Bane's face, slamming him into the ground. It's over, Bane, you can't beat me, Lemillion spoke, staring into Izuku's eyes behind his mask. Bane growled. You think so, don't you? I refuse to believe that. I can beat anyone no matter who they are. No one is invincible, he shouted, punching upward through Lemillion's chest as he allowed the attack to phase through him as Lemillion reared back, pushing his fist forward as fast and hard as he could. This is my new technique in honor of all those who came before me. Justice smash. Bane kicked out one leg, slamming it into Lemillion's right thigh, throwing the hero off balance and causing him to punch into the ground next to Bane. I thought so. You're not as stout as All Might, and just like Newton said, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. You don't have the sheer mass All Might had in order to counteract your punches, so you need to set yourself for each punch, which means a part of you needs to have a solid base. Bane said as Lemillion jumped back from him and he sat up. It took a while, I'll admit that, but now I know your weakness. Of course I still have no idea what your quirks are aside from One for All and apparently the ability to phase through things, but I'm pretty sure this teleportation ability you have links into one or both of your other quirks. Bane said, staring at Lemillion as the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, showing Bane's menagerie of villains had invaded the school. Well, Lemillion, seems like you're in check. My pieces have invaded your side of the board thoroughly, and though it looks like you've utterly destroyed Plasmus, I'd say we took a lot more pieces than you. Bane said, looking at Mirio. Of course you're free to continue fighting, I'll make sure no one interferes with us, but if you beat me I can't say what my men will do in retaliation. After all, it's not like you can kill me, can you? That's no how heroes work, is it? In order for you to win this you'd have arrest each and every one of us, and we both know the police aren't going to get involved in this if there are any left in the city. There's no happy ending here, Lemillion, but I will admit you beat me soundly in our fight before. Never have I been so overwhelmed. I suggest you take that small victory and leave. Bane said as the back wall was blown open as Asura crashed through it, a burned mess with several of his arms nothing more than charred stumps. Bane was shocked as he looked to the hole Asura had opened up, and there stood a bloody Endeavor, his flames nothing more than kindling across his body. He took stock of the situation before grabbing Lemillion and blasting out of the room, leaving a momentary inferno in his place as Lemillion struggled against him. Let me go, Endeavor. Lemillion yelled as they landed on a nearby building. Spotting no pursuit, Endeavor dropped Lemillion before punching him in the face. Stop acting like a brat, you little shit. It's over, we lost. Endeavor shouted, staring at Lemillion. Staying there would have been suicide. Endeavor shouted, dropping to a knee as his flames sputtered out. I don't like saying this, but you are the better hero. I would have no problem dying in a place like that surrounded by charred corpses, but if we're to win this war you have to lead it as the #1 hero. Endeavor said, standing up and looking at Lemillion before the two heard footsteps and looked to see two women, one of whom Engie knew intimately. Ray. Lemillion looked at the two women and cringed at the scars across one of the women's mouth. Excuse me, do you nay? Endeavor stood in front of Lemillion. Get out of here, kid. I have some things to discuss with my wife. Lemillion looked between Endeavor and this Ray woman, and seeing the resemblance to Todoroki his junior, Lemillion decided to follow Endeavor's orders and permeated down through the building. We've been looking for you, Ray. Don't you think it's time to come home? Endeavor said, walking towards his wife. Where's Shoto? Ray said, looking up, her skin releasing frosty vapor as her partner just stood there smiling like a maniac. I looked at home and no one was there. Where is Shoto, Engie? Ray asked once again. Endeavor raised a brow at his wife. Ray was acting different than usual. Of course he hadn't seen her since she'd injured Shoto, but she seemed more coherent. I moved them all out of the city. They're safe where they are. You need to come with me, Ray. You're sick and worse, you killed someone. He shouted, reaching for Ray's hand only to have her slap his hand away and look at him, a gleam of cold malice in her eye. Give me my son. Bane sat down at Nezu's desk and looked out the window at the battlefield surrounding the school as he noticed a large pillar of ice rise above one of the nearby buildings. He narrowed his eyes for a moment before signaling to one of his minions. Go check that out, he shouted as they moved to do his bidding. Bane turned to see his lieutenants. How many did we lose? Bane asked as Kurogiri appeared in the room. Out of the several hundred villains we had, I'd say about a quarter of them. Bane arched a brow. You're telling me the heroes actually killed them? Bane asked, a little shocked before Kurogiri clarified. Most were casualties of Endeavor's and Asura's battle. Kurogiri stated as Bane nodded. No matter, this city is ours. It'll be a beacon to all villains in Japan. They'll flock here and pledge themselves to me. We'll have an endless army," he said, standing as his enforcers nodded in acceptance. Bane stood up, looking at the kneeling form of Principal Nezu. "I'm not one for animal cruelty, so let's just get on with it," Bane said, kneeling in front of Nezu. "Very well then, I am ready," Nezu said, closing his eyes as Bane reached forward, snapping Nezu's neck in an instant. Checkmate. End flashback. Bane opened his eyes as the door to the conference room opened, admitting his underbosses. Toga was the first in as she skipped towards him in her villain costume, her hair wafting out behind her. He knew that after the battle Toga had been a little self-conscious about the scars around her mouth, but it didn't matter to him, and he'd let her know that as she planted herself in his lap. Next in was Dobby in his usual attire as he sat at the foot of the table directly across from Bane. Muscular came in topless as usual, in jeans and boots, his face showing off the scars he'd gotten from Kirishima and numerous other battles. He sat at Bane's left-hand side, smiling, ready for action. Leech and Croc entered soon after, sitting next to Muscular on his right side. Leech was dressed in a large red t-shirt, sweatpants. Killer Croc, much like Muscular, was shirtless with heavy jeans on his legs and no shoes. Twice sauntered in, dressed in his costume. "I love being here. I hate leaving my territory," he said, sitting down a couple seats from Bane's left hand. Compress sat next to him, taking off his hat in deference to his leader, as finally Kurogiri sat at Bane's left hand, leaving only 3 seats open. "Where's Spinner Dobby?" The flame villains shrugged. "How the hell should I know? I'm not his keeper. I saw him yesterday, that's it," Dobby said, putting his feet on the table. "I'll deal with him later. Now then, since you're all here, I'll begin. Chisaki has decided to break ties with us. He's been getting more and more uncooperative for a time now, so I'm not surprised. Normally I'd be more than willing to let him have his territory and do as he wishes, but in his rejection of our continued partnership he killed Magna. I can't let that stand, and I hope you all agree that he needs to be taken care of," Bane said as he heard murmurs of agreement. "I wasn't a fan of that fruitcake, but he was one of us, can't take that shit lying down," Muscular said, looking at his boss. "So we're going to war again, boss?" Muscular asked, eager for the slaughter. Bane nodded as he looked at his crew. "We are going to wipe out Chisaki and take everything he has, as payment for Magna's death," he said to the table at large. "Prepare yourselves, this isn't going to be like the War of Ua. Chisaki was one of us, he knows how we work and has an army of his own to combat us, not to mention his quirk killer bullets. He's probably already expecting retaliation, so he might try to strike first. Be on guard. Kurogiri, find Spinner and bring him to me," he said as he stood up, placing Toga on her feet. "Now you're all dismissed. I need to strategize. Once I've come up with a plan, we will move," he said as they all left to prepare for the upcoming battle. Lemillion walked into a meeting room on the top floor of a building in Tokyo. He and Aizawa were the last to arrive to this meeting to determine the future of Musutafu City. Lemillion looked at the other gathered heroes. Best Jeanist, Sun Eater, and Najire were also present. Mirio sat at the end of the table with Aizawa at his side. "Thank you for showing up, Lemillion. Now then, what do you have to report?" said the chairman of the Board of Heroes as Lemillion began his report. "As of yet, nothing has changed. Bane is still in Ua. The city is under his thumb completely, but I believe once we've removed Overhaul, that grip will loosen considerably." One of the board members scoffed. "I told you this was a waste of time. We should just go with the option of blasting Ua and all those villains off the map and be done with it." Lemillion clenched his fist, ready to shout before Aizawa spoke. "You'd be dooming all the captured heroes there to their deaths along with the villains. Are you sure that's something you want to put on the table?" Aizawa stated, looking at the members of the board. "Their heroes dying is an occupational hazard. In fact, I'm sure they'd prefer a quick death rather than the torture they've no doubt been put through for the last year," the board member challenged. "Be that as it may, you know as well as I do that UA's support course had many a failed invention in their care, not to mention the numerous volatile chemicals that it took to make some of those support items. Are you really willing to drop a bomb on a potential powder keg of unstable materials?" Aizawa said, his milky eye staring in the direction of the chairman, who shook his head. "You are right, Eraserhead. We can't do that at this time, but eventually we will have no choice. we've mounted attacks on Musudafu over the years and all have failed, mostly due to his line of giants. The chairman referred to Bane's guardian beasts, those with gigantification quirks led by none other than the infamous Gigantomachia. Those beasts can't be conquered. Lady gave her life to show us that. Everyone in the room bowed their heads at this before Lemillion stood up. Once more, Chairman, please give us one more chance. If we can take out Overhaul and cut off Bane's use of his quirk killer bullets, then I know we can push forward. The chairman sighed for a moment before nodding. One chance, Lemillion. If this operation goes south, I will go ahead and order the bombardment of Ua and hand this over to the military, he said, looking at Lemillion, who bowed in gratitude before leaving with Aizawa. Was that stuff true about volatile chemicals being held within Ua? Najire asked Eraserhead, catching up to him and Mirio in the elevator. Eraserhead scratched his chin and smirked. Of course not, but it was a necessary deception to buy us the time we need. If we let this go over to the military, they'll decimate that city and anyone in it. I'd rather not put the citizens through any more than they've already been through, Aizawa stated as Najire hugged him around the neck. Ah, you really are a softie, aren't ya? She said as Mirio smiled. I'd feel better if Night Eye were in on this with us, Best Jeanist said, striking a chord with Mirio, who shook his head. I haven't spoken with Sir since All Might died. He and I disagreed on how to handle Bane and I left his agency shortly after it closed. I don't know where he is or if he's still alive, Mirio said, walking out of the elevator as they all proceeded to new headquarters. Blast Lung rode up to a rundown nightclub on his Dodge Tomahawk. This was a favorite of Ingenium's sidekicks. It was the only way they could keep up with their boss and his insane speeds. It was painted black with red flecks throughout the paint job. This baby could hit 0 to 60 in 1.5 seconds and had a max speed of 420 miles per hour and howled like a banshee. That was his own doing. If this thing was chasing you, he wanted you hear it. Its 4 tires screeched around the back of the bar and into a narrow alleyway. Blast Lung walked the bike to the end of the alley before slamming his foot down. Opening a ramp, he walked down to a large living quarters where someone sat at a bank of computers. The man turned around, his green and hair marking him out as the missing hero Night Eye. How did it go, Katsuki? Night Eye asked as Katsuki walked forward, parking the bike as he removed his bomber jacket along with his bomb and gun belts. Spinner is dead, he said, walking up to a board with a picture of Bane and his warlords. Katsuki removed a knife from its holster at his back and slashed through Spinner's picture, half of it falling to the ground. Night Eye nodded, punching a few keys into the computer. The first strike has been made then. No doubt Bane will think it was Overhaul who killed Spinner, allowing us to keep our anonymity for a bit longer. This will be our chance during this war. All I need is a moment with him and then I can use my foresight to begin his end. Night Eye glared at the picture of Bane, gritting his teeth. This is exactly why Katsuki could work with Night Eye. He was just as disillusioned as he was. They both knew Bane was a monster, the likes of which even One for All couldn't contend with. He needed to be dealt with permanently. Katsuki stroked the barrel of his gun. I've got a bullet just for you, Izuku, Katsuki thought as he went to one of the cots in the corner of the room and fell asleep. Night Eye looked at Katsuki. Not too long ago he would have found the boy utterly reprehensible. He was rude, loud, and far too aggressive to be a hero in his former opinion, but now they both had a solid thing connecting their partnership: hatred. It had been Night Eye's order for Lemillion not to go out and assist All Might because he believed that his foresight was always correct. He'd seen All Might's death years before, but Bane had changed everything, and in that moment where he saw All Might's body he knew he'd failed his mentor and his student. He had been determined to take down Bane permanently, but Lemillion disagreed. He didn't believe that heroes had the right to be judge, jury and executioner. They went back and forth for a week before Lemillion finally decided to leave Night Eye, who closed his agency shortly after and went off the grid, deciding to stay in Musudafu hidden and do what he could to stop Bane. Night Eye was distraught about this, but he couldn't back down now. He needed Bane dead, but he wasn't nearly the combatant that All Might had been. No, he needed a partner, someone who felt the same burning hatred for Bane that he did, and he'd found that in Katsuki Bakugo. The boy had lost everything in a matter of months. His quirk, his education, his hero, and then to top it all off, his parents murdered by who they assumed was the Joker. Night Eye's eyes flicked away from the computer screen to a Joker playing card tacked onto the wall with the rest of the villains. No one had seen the Joker and lived to tell the tale. All they knew was that she was a woman and operated with another female villain known as Killer Frost, but she was sneaky, or maybe just thorough. They hadn't found a solid lead on her yet, but for now she was on the back burner. The big fish was Bane. I know you wouldn't agree with this, All Might, but there's no other option. This has to end. Night Eye said, going back to typing on his computer. That night outside of Overhaul's complex, two his guards stood at the front, one leaning against the front gate as he smoked a cigarette, the other took a hit from a flask before putting it back in his pocket. Both carried automatic rifles as they scanned the road leading up to the complex. You know Overhaul doesn't like us drinking on the job, the guard on the left said, chucking his cigarette butt into some nearby bushes. Yeah, well, Overhaul isn't standing out here freezing his off trying to make sure Bane doesn't break his back now, is he? The other one growled, glaring at his partner. This is bullshit, man. What we had with Bane was sweet ultimate protection, and now we're on standby to get our teeth kicked in. He ranted as he noticed some figures walking up the road. Both men stood tall, raising their guns. Stop right there or we'll blow you away, the one who'd been smoking shouted as the group walked up to them, stopping just short of the security lights before one stepped forward into the light. They were wearing a long hood before pulling it back and revealing it was a girl with bright green vines for hair. Excuse us, I think we might be lost. We were called to give a performance for the hard-working men of Overhaul's group, she said questioningly as she stepped forward more, opening her cloak to reveal her hair was twined around her body, effectively clothing her in green except for her beeps and the juncture of her legs, which each had a bright red rose in place, automatically drawing the eye to them. The one with the flask lowered his gun and swallowed. You probably need to search me, don't you? The young girl said, cocking her hip. I don't mind, but could you do it over there? I'm shy, she whispered as she pointed to the shadowy corner near the entrance. I didn't hear anything about this, we should call it in, the smoker said, grabbing his radio before the other one grabbed his hand. Now come on, do you think Overhaul is the kind of guy to announce something like this? It's a surprise, you know he's rewarding us before Bane kills most of us. It's to raise morale, man, and come on, all we have to do is search them and send them in, he said, licking his lips as he stared at the girl before holding his hand out to her. Come on, I'll give you a nice little pat down, he said, leading her away from the security light. His partner sighed. Pedo. All right, next, he shouted, hoping the next one wasn't some middle schooler pretending to be an adult, and he was disappointed once more. The next to step forward was just as young as the first, with light brown hair and brown eyes. The rest of her face was covered in a burlap half mask with stitches in the pattern of a jagged mouth. She pulled back her cloak to reveal a thin frame covered by a patchwork orange and black shirt that ended just below her beeps, with ragged jeans sporting similar patches and the right pant leg missing, leaving her leg bare to all in what he could only call moccasins. He rolled his eyes just as he heard a grunt, looking at his partner hunching over. Dude, seriously, you're her right here, he shouted, disgusted by his partner, who fell backwards dead with several roses jutting from his mouth. What the? Just as he was about to open fire on the group, the chick in front of him blew something from her mouth into his face. He coughed, waving the gun around, trying to clear the fumes from around him, only for his gun to turn into a snake and wrap around his arm, sinking its fangs into him and pumping him full of venom. Just as he was about to scream, his eyes dilated in terror as he looked at the girl in front of him, watching her turn into a monstrous scarecrow whose mouth oozed dark green fumes and eyes burned with fire. She reached out to him with her clawed hands, dragging them down his face, flaying his skin from the bone as he collapsed in terror, his heart giving out under the sheer panic. In reality, the girl had simply brushed her hands across his face, but due to her illusion it seemed far more sinister. From the remaining members, one of them stepped forward, clapping happily. As she entered the light, her chalk-white skin gleamed in the artificial light, her blood-red lips drawing attention to the scars stretching her mouth into an unnaturally wide smile. The woman had bright green hair that flowed from her head in a gnarled mess. She was dressed in a purple pantsuit, showing off her thin figure. It all ended with a pair of black dress shoes. The woman crouched down over the man with roses in his mouth and giggled quietly. I've heard of flowery speech, but this is ridiculous, she shouted as she laughed loudly. Nice work, girls. You make Mama Joker so proud of you. she said, keying each girl on the forehead as she rifled through the men's pockets, finding the key to the door as she let herself in. "Well, come on, the party can't start without us," she said excitedly, skipping forward toward the front door of the complex. As she did so, she heard the sound of her partner in crime taking care of any opposition, freezing them in an instant. Killer Frost walked calmly towards the complex, sending out ice blasts here and there to freeze any enemies she saw before they could raise an alarm, as Joker stepped up to the front door and opened it, shaking her head. "They didn't even lock the door. Don't they know it's dangerous at night?" she said as she stepped into the darkened entryway, her eyes and teeth seeming to glow in the dark as she and her posse made their way into the Yakuza's base, splitting up to slaughter the unsuspecting gangsters. Killer Frost turned to the left and slowly began walking down the hall before coming to a kitchen where several men were eating. She walked in slowly, her body emitting cold, gaining the men's attention right before she placed her hands on their necks, freezing their windpipes shut immediately as they fell to the floor, suffocating. The other three rushed her as she slammed her foot on the floor, sending out ice spikes and pierced them to the wall, their blood oozing down the spikes as they died. She smiled coldly before walking out of the room and shutting off the light. In the sleeping quarters, Scarecrow cracked open the door and looked inside, her dark brown eye scanning the sleeping men as she exhaled a cloud into the room and turned on the light as she slammed the door, waking up everyone inside, who instantly fell under her illusion. There were screams before blows and gunfire rang out. Scarecrow walked away from the door as the carnage continued inside. Poison Ivy smiled at the man she'd just keyed as he stood up with his gun bared. "Go kill them and then shoot yourself," she ordered as the man walked off and began opening fire on anyone he saw as the green-haired girl began making her way to the rendezvous spot with Joker. Her SLA*** joined several others and walked down a set of stairs into an earthen tunnel, firing on anyone in sight. Overhaul sat on a couch, one of his arms slung over the back and the ankle of one leg resting on the knee of the other. The majority of his men gathered in front of him, and sitting on the couch at his right side was Airy, his golden goose. The young girl was curled in on herself, trying to make herself as small as possible as Overhaul addressed his men. "As you all know, we are at war with Bane. I made my declaration yesterday, but Bane has not made a move yet, which is as I expected. We're not dealing with some idiot villain or hero. Bane is a strategist. He won't attack until he's got everything planned out, but we hold the advantage. We know he's coming, and unlike us, he doesn't have our ammunition. We'll wait for him to come to us and then rip them to shreds." There was a small laugh in the crowd, instantly gaining Overhaul's attention. The crowd parted around one guy who was covering his mouth as he stared fearfully at Overhaul. "Did I say something funny?" Overhaul asked, and just as the guy uncovered his mouth, he began to laugh out loud, clutching his stomach as he fell to his knees, laughing constantly. Overhaul's eyes widened as he pulled out a gun and shot the man dead, watching his body fall forward only for another man to start laughing quickly, followed by more, until the whole room was laughing raucously. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, standing to his feet as he began opening fire on his men until he ran out of bullets, only then realizing what was going on. "Airy," he shouted, looking towards the gun only to find an older woman having taken his seat and had placed a gas mask over Airy's face as the young girl sat in her lap, but what really drew his attention was the gun the woman had in her hand, pointed straight at him. The pistol she held had a ridiculously long barrel. If he wasn't staring down the end of it, he might have laughed. "Joker," Overhaul said calmly, looking at the woman, who smiled happily, although that feeling wasn't transmitted to her eyes. "Oh good, you know me and I know you, so we can skip past the pleasantries," she said before shooting him in both arms. Overhaul gasped as he looked at his arms. He couldn't move them now, which meant he wouldn't be able to heal these wounds. "Yeah, I know about your quirk and how it works, thanks to my precious Ivy." "Say hi, Ivy," Joker said as Overhaul turned around, realizing the laughing had stopped, and in the room stood all of Joker's gang. Killer Frost, Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, and as he stared at the shadows, noticed someone standing there, and it looked like they were flipping a coin as they stared him down. "You won't believe the things your guys say during pillow talk. What do they say? Loose lips sink ships, but I guess when it comes to women, tight ones do the same." "Ha," Joker said as she stroked Ares' head, looking at the numerous wounds on her body, her green eyes growing darker by the second. "Why are you here, Joker? Are you working with Bane now? Did he send you?" Overhaul asked as he looked around, trying to find a way out of this situation. He'd prepared this place for an all-out assault, but he would never have imagined that Joker would make a move on him. She worked in the shadows. Nobody knew what her deal was aside from killing everybody she could. He'd seen pictures of her victims and it was a grisly sight, truly the work of a madwoman. Working with Bane, she asked as she laughed softly. Everything I do is for Bane. He's my king. The highest valued face card in my deck, not infallible, to be sure, but that's why he needs me. I'm his Joker. Without him I have no value, but I'm dangerous in my own way, but together we can hold any value. We can shift and adapt to any threat we face. I will pave over any obstacle for him, and that just so happens to be you. She said, smiling as wide as possible before shooting Overhaul through the head and watching him fall to the ground. Eri jolted in her lap, cowering under Joker's gentle stroking. Joker looked down at the girl before tossing the gun to the side and holding Eri to her chest. I'm sorry you had to see that, baby, but it's all over now. She whispered, smiling down at Eri. Hey, what's your name? She asked the young girl as she pulled the mask from her face, looking down into Eri's red eyes. Eri. The young girl stuttered out as Joker smiled. That's a pretty name. My name is Inko, but all my friends call me Joker. Do you want to be my friend, Eri? The older woman asked as she waved to her girls to go about their business. The group dispersed to carry out their renovations. Okay, I'd like that, Eri whispered, looking down and fiddling with her short dress. Joker smiled wide at this and moved to nuzzle Eri's cheek with her. Oh, that's wonderful, Eri. You know I have a son and he was just like you, all shy and stuttered. He was the cutest little thing when he was your age. He got that from me, by the way. He's going to be here soon, and I think he's going to like you a lot. Do you want to meet my son, Eri? Joker asked, her eyes bright with anticipation as she looked at the young girl. Even though Eri had seen this woman murder her guardian and had heard she killed a lot of people, she felt safe in her arms more so than at any other time. She found herself nuzzling against Joker, practically trying to crawl into the woman's body as she nodded happily, her mouth forming a shy smile. Yes, I'd like to meet him, she whispered as she drifted off to sleep, listening to Joker's quiet laughter, the vibrations in her chest lulling her to sleep. Lemillion stood once more outside the city of Musudafu. This was their last chance to gain a foothold in the city. With him stood Eraserhead, Sun Eater, Najire, Present Mike, and Ms. Joke, along with several minor heroes. Their ranks were bolstered by several provisional licensed students from Shiketsu and Kutsubutsu academies, those being Shinso, Eraserhead's apprentice, Nagamasa Mora, Inasa Yoarashi, Froppy, Earphone Jack, Uravity, Pinky, and Yo Shindo. Lemillion turned around and looked at the gathered heroes. Lemillion turned around to speak to his comrades. This is the last chance we will have to save this city, everyone. If we don't take down Overhaul, we will lose this city. Our overseers will declare this place a threat to national security and bomb it off the map. We cannot allow that, he shouted, raising his fist as golden lightning arced around his raised fist. There was a cheer as the heroes followed after Lemillion. Over the last year, the heroes had made secret entrances into the city in order to get in and out without detection. There was one near Chisaki's base they used to enter the city. Thankfully, Chisaki was cautious and had decided to set up shop as far from Bane as possible. They came upon the wall that had been built around Musudafu. It was pretty much a ring of destroyed buildings, but thanks to the efforts of Pinky's acid they'd been able to burn a tunnel through the building and into the city. The former UA students took a moment to look around at what had happened to their city in their absence and shook their head, trying to force back their tears as they spotted Chisaki's hideout. Everyone get ready, Lemillion ordered as the heroes broke into their respective teams, Lemillion having Eraserhead, Inasa, and Shinso. On Najire's team were Sun Eater, Pinky, and Uravity. The last team was composed of Present Mike, Ms. Joke, Shindo, Earphone Jack, Froppy, and Nagamasa. The teams broke apart surrounding the complex. Lemillion looked on, noticing there were no exterior guards. I don't see anyone. Eraser, do you think they may have moved their base? Lemillion asked, clenching his fist. If they had, this could be an unexpected windfall for them. They could take this base without having to fight anyone. Eraserhead rubbed his scruffy chin as he shook his head. It could be, but we should still proceed with caution. All teams move in, Eraserhead ordered as all the heroes began to move in on the building, each finding a point of ingress. As each team entered their respective hallways, lights came on as the doors shut behind the heroes and the floor opened underneath them as a voice was heard. "You're supposed to knock when you enter someone's home. Didn't your mothers teach you young'uns any manners?" A feminine voice asked, crackling through a PA system. "You're not the guests I planned to have, but I do enjoy a bit of spontaneity, so let's have some fun." Team Lemillion. Lemillion turned to punch out the door that had shut behind his team, but the floor dropped out from under him before he could, as he, Eraserhead, and Shinso began to fall. Luckily Inasa used his winds to keep them all aloft and fly them to more stable footing. "Nice one, Inasa," Lemillion said as he stood up with Eraserhead and Shinso. "Wow, what a cool quirk you have, it totally blew me away." He, but seriously, take this more seriously because even I don't know what's going to happen next, it's a real toss-up. Ha 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 ha. You don't get that now, but you will. The PA system shut off once more as a door at the end of the hall opened up, revealing a two-toned room. One side was painted a stark white while the other was painted blood red. There was a man standing in the middle of the room in a two-color suit mirroring the color of the room he was in. As the four men entered the room, Aizawa as well as Shinso and Inasa's eyes went wide, recognizing the person in front of them. The young man looked at the four heroes, his mismatched eyes glaring at them full of hate. Todoroki. Team Nijire fell through the trapdoor, sliding down a long tunnel before being deposited into what felt like a freezer. "Are you guys all right?" Nijire asked as she rubbed her arms, her breath fogging in the air as she looked around and her heart nearly stopped. The room was filled with frozen corpses standing in various positions, but the one constant was the look of fear etched onto their faces. But the most striking of all the corpses was the one at the very back. It was captured in a massive ice pillar, but the person inside was all too familiar to the group of four. It was the flame hero Endeavor, frozen solid, and standing right underneath him was a pale woman with snow-white hair and dead gray eyes. "I know how you guys feel. When I saw old Flame face down there, it stopped me cold too. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, have fun, Snowflake." The voice cackled as Killer Frost walked forward, her hands glowing with compressed cold as she launched her first volley of ice. Team Joke. Nagamasa acted fast, extending his hair out to catch and hold everyone above the trap door before depositing them on through the door, entering a large greenhouse apparently. "I think we should head back," Joke tried to get to one of the other teams. Present, Mike said as the door behind them shut with a loud hum emanating from it. "Sounds like they've electrified it, Mike. Besides, it's safe to say that Overhaul is no longer in control of this base," Joke said, slowly walking with the rest of her team deeper into the indoor forest. "Bingo, baby girl, you're in the Joker's funhouse now. I really hope you stay and enjoy it. My girls worked hard on all this. You wouldn't want to hurt their feelings now, would you?" They all could hear the underlying threat in Joker's voice. "We have to play the game for now, Mike. If we don't, Joker's not going to stick to the rules either," Joke said as the ground began to rumble and sprouting from it was a massive plant that opened up to reveal another familiar face. "Abara." Present, Mike said, a questioning eyebrow raising above his glasses. The girl in question gave a gentle smile as her flower throne lowered to the ground, letting her walk off it. "It's so good to see you, Mike Sensei. You know, when you called me an assassin at the sports festival, you didn't know how right you were," Abara shouted as she threw a flurry of roses towards the teacher, only for them to be knocked out of the way by a combination of Jiro's, Jack's and Nagamasa's hair. From a monitor room, Joker sat in a chair with Eri on her lap as the two shared a bowl of popcorn. "Isn't this fun, Eri?" Joker asked as she heard a scoff the young girl who was wearing her new dress. It was black and red with each of the four card suits prominently displayed, with two on her chest and the other two on her back to complete the ensemble. She wore red shoes with black bells at the toes. The older woman turned around, staring at Scarecrow with a raised brow. "Something on your mind, Crow?" Joker asked. "Like, this beeps. How come I'm stuck here?" Scarecrow asked as she sat down, crossing her arms as Joker picked up Eri, sitting her down in her chair as she walked over to the teenaged girl. "Because I need you here. The others are more than capable of taking care of this, but on the slim chance they're not, you'll be my trump card, my ace in the hole. I need you," Joker said, stroking the girl's hair as she smiled behind her burlap mask before the Clown Queen went back to watching the show. Bane sat at a table. He was looking over everything he knew about Overhaul and his base, what it would take to bring it down. "Why not just have Gigantomachia go over and, like, sit on it or something, Bane?" Toga asked as she threw several knives at a dartboard with a picture of Chisaki on it before pulling the knives free and repeating the process. I could do that, but I'm sure all of Japan has surveillance on him. If they see him moving, then that'll give away that something is wrong in the city and they might move. I'd rather not fight Chisaki and the heroes at the same time. No, one problem at a time, he said, standing up as he thought about his other problem. Spinner had been found dead in his territory, his head blown off. Bane assumed it was Chisaki's doing, but why kill Spinner and then not take over his territory? Sure, it wasn't large, but it would be a step forward nonetheless. He shook his head. Someone else is out there, but whom? The villain asked himself as he stared at his plans. It shouldn't take too much longer now, 2 days at the most. He assured himself more than Toga. Aizawa and Shinso were shocked at seeing Todoroki in this place. From what they knew, Todoroki was evacuated along with the majority of the people from the city during the early days of Bane's rule, but now he was here and in league with the Joker. That made no sense. Todoroki, what are you doing here? Aizawa asked as he heard a rough chuckle from the young man in front of him as he flipped a coin, catching it in midair, and smiled. Coin says I'm not telling you, he said as he went to release a large blast of ice, only to be stopped by Aizawa's quirk, his one eye glowing red as Todoroki reached behind him, grabbing hold of his Springfield XD and fired off several shots, making the heroes scatter into 2 groups, Shinso and Aizawa moving to the white right side of the room and Lemillion and Inasa over to the left red side. Aizawa grit his teeth, using his quirk in only one eye took more of a toll than in both, and having that on top of the damage the Nomu did, his quirk's timing was severely diminished. He blinked, and in that moment Todoroki activated his ice, creating a large wall to block Aizawa's view, but left him open to an attack by Lemillion, who appeared right in front of him, his fist crackling with golden energy as he punched forward. Todoroki created a cloak of flames around himself, thinking it would stop Lemillion, but the hero passed through his flames unharmed as his fist slammed into Todoroki's cheek, sending him flying back before the dual quirk user created an ice wall to brace himself and opening fire once again, his bullets passing harmlessly through Lemillion. Todoroki growled as he noticed Aizawa scaling his ice wall with his scarf. He ditched the cartridge in his gun, replacing it as he rolled to the left, avoiding Lemillion as he popped off 2 shots at the hero, who let them pass through him, but failed to notice he had blocked Aizawa's view of Todoroki and therefore was unprepared for the bullets slamming into his leg and shoulder, causing him to fall off Todoroki's ice wall, almost hitting the ground before Inasa managed to catch him in a wind cushion before placing him on the ground. Inasa turned, glaring at Todoroki. Unknown to the others, he also knew Todoroki and his father, and now, just as before, he could see that burning hatred that father and son shared, and it made him sick. He launched a volley of wind at Todoroki, who countered with a stream of flames, causing the wind to rise and punch a hole in the ceiling, causing debris to rain down on the left side of the field. Shinso stepped next to Aizawa, looking at his teacher's wounds. They weren't fatal or anything, but both knew the implications of what just happened. They were in Overhaul's base and Aizawa had just been shot, no doubt with one of Overhaul's quirk killer bullets. It was safe to say Aizawa could no longer cancel out Todoroki's quirk, which was bad for their team, knowing the explosive power Todoroki wielded. Shinso, use your brainwashing, see if you can get him to talk, Aizawa said as he ripped the sleeve off his shirt and tied it tightly around the wound in his leg. Shinso nodded before fiddling with the dials of his mask. Todoroki was on the defensive, holding off Inasa's wind with his fire and creating walls of ice to block Lemillion's vision so he could get out of the way before Lemillion could land another heavy hit. All of a sudden he heard Aizawa's voice calling out to him. Todoroki, stop this, you're not a villain. Tell me what Joker did to you, maybe we can help. You were my student, it's my responsibility to help you. Todoroki smiled as he pressed a button on his wrist right as Lemillion smashed his fist into the younger boy's side, slamming him all the way to the back of the room, planting him solidly in the wall. Lemillion was panting a little as he heard a scream. He turned to the right and saw liquid nitrogen spraying from the wall. It had sprayed over Shinso as the boy was snatched away from the wall by Aizawa, who was taking cover behind one of Todoroki's ice walls. On the other side, Inasa was walking forward before a vent opened under him and flames erupted from it, catching the wind user in an inferno. Inasa yelled, using his wind to disperse the flames around him, but the damage had already been done as his suit was charred, his hair was gone, and the exposed skin of his face was a brilliant red and sizzling as he collapsed there on the spot. Lemillion turned around looking to Todoroki only to find him gone through a hidden door. Lemillion raced over towards Inasa before Aizawa shouted, "What are you doing? Go after him." The former teacher said as he limped over towards Inasa. "I'll take care of these two, but you need to find Joker." This place was dangerous in Overhaul's hands, but in Joker's hands it's infinitely more so. You need to make sure this place falls under our control no matter what. Lemillion bit his lip before nodding and racing through the secret entrance. "I will, Eraserhead," he shouted as he left. Eraserhead continued to limp over to the smoking form of Inasa, who thankfully was still breathing. He grabbed hold of the teen, inhaling some of the smoke, and coughed a little as he dragged the boy over to the ice wall. Once he sat Inasa down and looked him over, he gave a chuckle and didn't know why. "I must be in shock if I find this funny," he said before laughing some more and then increasingly more and more. Aizawa's eyes widened as he turned to look at the vent Inasa had collapsed on and saw it was still smoking. "That's not smoke, it's Joker gas," he shouted, still laughing more and more, feeling his face stretch into a large smile as he fell back against the ice wall laughing wildly. It felt like Aizawa was suffocating. Any air he got was immediately expelled in laughter. He clutched his throat as his legs kicked back and forth until his entire frame fell still with the trademark smile stretched across his dead face. Nejire flew into the air to avoid the blast of ice while Sunniator used tentacle fingers to pull himself out of the way. Pinky used her special move Acid Veil to block the ice attack, protecting her and Uravity from the frozen onslaught. Above Killer Frost, Nejire rocketed down towards the ice villain, releasing her wave motion towards her as Sunniator in perfect unison transformed his hand into a large clam and went to slam it into Killer Frost's side, only for the villain to place her hands on the ground. "Ice geyser," she said softly as spikes of ice rose out of the ground, nearly impaling both heroes, causing Nejire to release her wave motion prematurely, shattering the ice and spraying shards across the area, catching Sunniator in it before he used his clam hand to block the brunt of it. Killer Frost back flipped away, creating an ice slide to glide around the two heroes, shooting blasts of cold at Sunniator and Nejire, only to narrowly avoid a stream of acid by Pinky, but did not recover in time before Uravity clotheslined her, knocking her off her slide and crashing into one of the frozen victims. The four heroes regrouped, looking at their enemy as she slowly rose to her feet. "So this is Killer Frost," Nejire said as they got a good look at the villainess. She was wearing a white fur-lined blue coat with blue and white striped leggings with white boots. Her white hair was cut short around her neck, but the most striking feature were her cold gray eyes. It was like there was no life there at all. If the room wasn't already freezing, her gaze definitely would chill them to the bone. Speaking of freezing, Sunniator noticed the slight shivering of Uravity and Pinky. "Nejire, you and the other two should leave," he said, stepping forward, his clam hand transforming into a large crab claw. "What, Sunniator, we can't just leave you. We'll take her down as a group," Nejire said, rejecting the proposal immediately. "You three can't take the cold in here. The longer you stay, the more weakened you'll become. The animals of Eden were mostly seafood. They can take the cold better than you guys can. If you stay, you'll get slower and slower, and the stamina you need for your power will be used up that much quicker. Now go, I've got this," he said as Killer Frost caught sight of her dead husband. Even though he was dead and she knew it, his eyes still struck fear into her, reminded her how pathetic and weak she was. "No, I can't fail Shoto again," she whispered to herself as she noticed the three girls running for the door at the end of the hall. "No," she screeched, sending a wall of ice towards the door, narrowly allowing the three to pass through before she sealed it off. Killer Frost grit her teeth and grabbed her head as she twisted back and forth, ranting and raving about her failure. "I'm not a failure. I'm not a failure. Stop, I can fix this. I will fix this." Sunniator watched as ice started to crawl out from around Killer Frost's loss of control until Joker spoke again. "Frost darling, chill, take a deep breath," Joker said, immediately shutting down Frost's temper tantrum. "It's fine, I was going to ask you to leave those girls alive anyway. I'm sure they'd come in handy and they're just so cute." Joker giggled as Killer Frost regained her composure. "Just deal with the hentai reject over there and I'll make sure those girls are well taken care of," Joker said before turning off the PA. Killer Frost took a deep breath and released it slowly. It looked as if she was exhaling fog as the mist in the room began to grow thicker. "No, I won't let you," Sunniator shouted as he shot his tentacle fingers forward after Frost's silhouette, and once he'd gotten a grip he snatched her forward only to find he'd grabbed one of her many victims around the room. Stupid mistake, he chastised himself as he began turning in a circle trying to find her, but as soon as he turned his back he felt a shooting pain in his leg and swung his arm, narrowly missing Frost as she dodged back into the fog. Sunniator looked down, seeing he'd been stabbed through the right leg with an icicle. He hissed as he pulled it free, seeing his blood pour down his leg onto the floor. He looked around, limping slowly, trying to keep his guard as he saw a flash of blue and sent his tentacles out again, only to yell as his fingers were pierced on ice spikes that had been positioned to where he saw the light. He grit his teeth as he felt a cut across his back, seeing Frost and snapping at her with his crab claw, slicing through her coat as she jumped back into the fog. He growled, going after her. He knew it was a bad idea to chase after her, but with the way things were going he'd be cut to ribbons before he landed a solid hit. The blood loss and the cold weren't doing him any favors either. He was starting to get sluggish, his reflexes decreasing drastically as he slipped on a trail of ice, falling to his back and feeling his arms be pierced as Killer Frost drove icicles through them, only to place her hands on his chest and began freezing him to the floor. Sunniator tried to struggle against the imprisonment, but slowly lost more and more of his strength. The last thing he saw was Killer Frost smiling down at him sadly. "Sleep tight," she whispered before standing up and looking at the door she'd frosted over. Present Mike standing next to Earphone Jack, both using their sound quirks to pin down Abara as Shindo used his quirk to shake the ground, uprooting the numerous plants in the room as they tried to attack the group of 6. Froppy was jumping from tree to tree before using her tongue to try and wrap around Abara, who shot out her vines, wrapping around the frog girl's tongue, the thorns digging deep into the delicate flesh of Froppy's tongue and through here wide, slamming her into Shindo and stopping the miniature earthquake. Nagamasa took Froppy's place, sending several thick locks of hair to bind the plant user. He wrapped around her tightly, bringing her towards him. "I've captured her," he shouted to his teammates before turning around and feeling Abara key him. He was shocked at first before his mind went blank and all he could think of was pleasing Abara. Poison Ivy smiled at him before speaking. "Put me down." And immediately she was placed back on her feet as she stroked Nagamasa's thick strands of hair. "Good boy, now kill them," she ordered her new SLA***, who jumped to do her bidding, his hair stretching out to ensnare his comrades, wrapping tightly around Ms. Joke, Earphone Jack, and Shindo. His hair was rebuffed by Present Mike's shouting and Froppy was nowhere to be seen. Shindo gripped Nagamasa's hair in his hands, channeling vibrations through it in an effort to make the older student drop him, but the hair wasn't stable enough to absorb any vibrations to do any kind of damage. Abara laughed as the three were slowly crushed under Nagamasa's grip before receiving a sweep to her legs as she was in midair. Froppy's tongue grabbed hold of Poison Ivy, whirling her around before body slamming her to the ground, a large plume of dust erupting around the grounded villain. Present Mike sent a loud shout towards Nagamasa, sending the teen flying backwards into a tree, making him drop his captives. As everyone regained their senses, they saw Froppy on the ground, sweating hard and green ooze spilling from her mouth. Ms. Joke rushed over to the young heroine as Present Mike cautiously stepped towards Nagamasa, finding him in the same position. "They've been poisoned," Ms. Joke stated as she checked Froppy's pulse. "This isn't good, Mike, we need to get them help," Ms. Joke said, grabbing Froppy in her arms and looking to her colleague. "Mike, what are you doing? We need to get out of here," she shouted, casting a glance at Poison Ivy, finding her still unconscious. "We can't all leave, Joke. You and Shindo take those two out of here. Me and Earphone Jack will continue forward. We're this city's last chance. We can't give up just yet." Ms. Joke wanted to protest, but Mike was right. At least with Shindo she'd have a better chance of defending these two. "All right, Shindo, let's go," she said, walking back out of the room as Shindo threw Nagamasa over his shoulder, making their way back to the entrance. Present Mike watched as Joke and Shindo walked through the door before looking at Jiro. "Let's go," he said simply as the two of them walked past the villain Froppy had risked everything to beat and entered a new room. Joker sat in her chair. She was picking at her scars again. She only did this when she was frustrated about something. She looked at the three girls, Lemillion and the two sound users, making their way deeper into her fun house. "They really are doing well, aren't they, Eri?" she asked as she looked to the little girl in her lap, who nodded in agreement. "A little too well," Scarecrow, take care of the girls, but bring them back alive, understand? She asked, looking over the back of her chair as Scarecrow's eyes glowed with joy before back-flipping out the door. Now what to do about the pair of speakers? She said, rubbing her chin as she looked to the camera in Killer Frost's lair, seeing that mother and son had reunited. That'll be fun. Najire led Uravity and Pinky through numerous halls until they entered a room of mirrors with several corridors branching off. Oh man, looking at all these mirrors is making me sick, Uravity said, getting a sense of vertigo from the numerous mirrors reflecting the same image multiple times. Yeah, the vertigo is real here, Pinky stated as the trio of women walked deeper into the room. Which way should we go, Najire? Pinky asked her elder as the blue-haired woman looked around before shrugging. I suppose it doesn't really matter, it's not like we have a layout of this place, and even if we did it'd be useless with all that Joker's done to it, so we might as well pick one at random and hope we can figure a way out. Najire picked the center corridor and began heading down it. The mirrors were disorienting, but Najire had learned a trick when it came to the Hall of Mirrors. If you kept your eyes on the ground, it helped to keep you grounded. Bad part of that plan is that they were in enemy territory. If she kept her eyes on the ground, they could be attacked at any moment. This totally beats, she said as she caught sight of something in her peripheral. She looked up, seeing a shadowy figure before it disappeared. Hold on, girls, she said as she looked at the floor in front of her, spotting a branching hall to their right. She slid against the wall of mirrors before blasting some of the mirrors near the corner so her opponent couldn't see her coming. Najire rounded the corner fast with her wave force charged and ready, but didn't see anyone until it was too late. Scarecrow had been hanging from the ceiling and blew something in Najire's face, causing her shot to go off target, shattering several more mirrors. Scarecrow laughed maniacally as she disappeared further into the corridor. That's like 30 years bad luck, she cried out as Najire stopped, coughing and wiping her eyes as she looked back at her two partners, her eyes widening in fear as she saw a monstrous pink demon with large horns and black eyes with fangs and claws rushing towards her. Next to it was some kind of pink and green goblin-type creature. They were both coming towards her full speed. What did you do with Uravity and Pinky? She shouted, unleashing her wave force at both of them, shattering all the mirrors in the hall as the pink demon dodged her blast by clinging to the wall, its claws melting the stone of the wall as the goblin-like creature was showered with glass shards, its green blood flowing across its body. You monsters, where are my friends? Najire shouted again as the demon launching itself at her, spraying a substance from its claws. Najire, and having seen what its claws had done to the wall, she was eager to get away from it by flying down the hall away from two beasts. What could have happened to the girls? I can't believe I let this happen. Ashido ran back to Uraraka, looking at her friend covered in cuts and her own blood. What the hell was that? Najire attacked us like we were the enemy. Ashido shouted as Uraraka sat up slowly, looking at Ashido. She must be under the enemy's control, or maybe she's hallucinating. I saw some kind of gas or smoke come from the hallway right after Najire rounded the corner. We have to help her before it's too late, Uraraka said as she stood up, ignoring the stinging cuts all over her body as she and Ashido pursued Najire. Najire dropped to the floor. Her energy was getting low. She'd released a lot of energy recently, and even though she was now sitting, it felt like she couldn't catch her breath. Najire raised her fist as she heard a footstep, only to find Lemillion there. Oh, thank God, Mirio, it's you, she shouted happily, hugging her best friend. I need your help. I can't find Pinky or Uravity, and there are these monsters hanging around, not to mention some kind of scarecrow person. Then Sunniator told me to leave him behind to fight Killer Frost, and I did, and he hasn't come back yet. She shouted speedily, even more than her usual hyper-fast talking. Najire, calm down. First things first, we should take care of these monsters, and Scarecrow, then we'll put an end to Joker. Lemillion said as he stepped forward, and Najire turned, seeing the two monsters. You're right, Lemillion, let's put these guys down, Najire shouted as she and Lemillion rushed towards the two beasts. Uravity and Pinky rounded the corner, finding Najire, but she was with some kind of scarecrow. The two were talking as if they were good friends. Who is that Uravity? Pinky asked before hearing Najire call out Lemillion's name. She's the one controlling Najire, Ashido. Listen, I'll take on the scarecrow and you handle Najire. You'd be a better match for her maneuverability than me, Uraraka said as Ashido jumped into action, spraying acid at Najire, who dodged flawlessly before firing off another wave motion blast, narrowly missing the pink teen. Release Najire from your mind control, Uraraka said as she moved to engage Scarecrow, who nimbly dodged around Uravity as if her punches were thrown in slow motion. How about I do this instead? Scarecrow answered, breathing out more of her glamour mist, but Uraraka, having seen this before, held her breath as she grabbed hold of Scarecrow's arm and punched her in the face, blood spraying across Uravity's hand and face. The young girl stopped cold as she watched Scarecrow fall to the ground dead. Uraraka, what did you do? Ochako looked up, seeing Najire and Mina looking at her in horror. I didn't. No, she can't be. Ochako fell to her knees, pressing her hands against Scarecrow's wrist, not feeling a pulse at all. No, I didn't meant to kill. You have to believe me, please. Uravity screamed, tears falling down her face as she saw the judgmental looks of her friends as she began to cry harder. Scarecrow smiled, looking at the three girls standing in the middle of the room enjoying her glamour. The truth is, the moment they'd stepped into this room, they'd been in her world. Everything from the moment the door opened was by her design. She couldn't help but giggle evilly as she walked up to the three girls and shot each one in the arm with a tranquilizer. Of course that would break her illusion, but it didn't matter now. Their minds were hers to do with as she pleased. What a beautiful nightmare, she said, spinning in place and laughing. Present Mike and Earphone Jack walked through a door and immediately regretted it. The room they entered was what one could only call the remains of a slaughterhouse. There was blood splattered over every surface. Present Mike made a point to only breathe out of his mouth while Jiro fell against a wall, vomiting as she looked from one gory aspect to another. Jiro, pull yourself together. You need to keep calm and just push past this, he said, swallowing as he walked past the couch and coffee table, the only spots with no blood on them, and into the hallway behind the couch. He then heard it, the clicked guns, and immediately sounded of with a scream of, no. His voice rocketed down the hall into the group of mind-controlled men there with guns. Present Mike watched in shock as their ears exploded with blood, but not missing a beat opened fire, penetrating the pro with multiple bullets before he took cover. Present Mike, Jiro shouted as she looked at the pro before her, covered in blood, as he coughed. Shit, they got me with those bullets. You have to run, Jiro. These guys didn't even hesitate after having their eardrums destroyed by my screams. The mind control is too strong. Abara didn't have this quirk in UA, so this must have been done by Joker. Look, get out of here. I'll hold them off while you go rendezvous with Joke, the pro said as he stood up, hearing the footsteps of the men getting closer. Present Mike, I can't leave you here. You don't have your quirk and you're injured. We should both get out of here, Jiro said, trying to pull the older man with her, only for him to shake her off. No, Jiro, I retreated once already in my life. At the Battle of Ua, I got me and Eraserhead out of there along with a few others, but not as many as I should have. I swore that day that I wouldn't retreat again. Now go, he shouted, pushing her towards the door, and tackled the first guy to round the corner and slugged him right in the jaw before taking cover behind his body as his comrades opened fire without a second thought at riddling their friend with bullets as Mike threw the body at them, knocking their aim off. He looked to the side, seeing the door open and Jiro's retreating figure. Go, kid, he said as he charged into the group as they opened fire on him. Lemillion smashed through a massive steel door, looking into a small room, the back wall covered in screens, and sitting in front of them was none other than the Joker. She sat there with her wide smile, greeting him as if they were old friends. Well, look who dropped in, Harley, Joker said, standing up as she sat Eri down next to her, the two holding hands as they looked at Lemillion. It's so nice to meet you, Lemillion. I've heard so much about you. The new symbol of peace, and at such a young age. Your mother must be so proud. Shut up, Joker. You're a monster, even more than Bane. I can at least understand his motivations, no matter how cruel or they seem. He has a purpose, but you. I can't understand your madness. You're sick, Lemillion shouted as he looked to the little girl at her side, no doubt a hostage taken just in case. Twisted, Joker responded, her long green hair shadowing her eyes. Excuse me, Lemillion questioned, trying to think how he could handle this. He wished he had Inasa with him. With his wins, it'd be a piece of cake to separate the two. I'm not sick, I'm twisted. Sick makes it sound like there's a cure. Ha 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 ha. Joker cackled as she pressed a button and the screens behind her changed, showing the various states of his comrades. Lemillion's jaw dropped as he saw the smiling corpse of Aizawa, the frozen form of Sunniator, the glazed terrified looks on Najire, Uravity, and Pinky's faces, and finally the bullet-ridden corpse of Present Mike. Don't worry, I'll have the Wind Boy taken care of, but the other one, he seems interesting. I don't know what it is about him, but he interests me. The other 5 got away, but that was all part of the plan. I needed some of you to get away, to tell the tale," she said as golden energy crackled around Lemillion. "You monster," Lemillion shouted, and for the first time in a long time Lemillion wasn't smiling as he disappeared through the floor, coming up between Joker's feet and uppercutting the woman as he grabbed hold of Eri. Joker flew into the air before landing in a heap on the ground not far away. Lemillion looked down at the girl he had hold of. "You're safe now, I'll get you." "Oh, you." "No, Joker," Eri shouted, struggling against Lemillion's grasp before turning to face him, her red eyes burning with anger as her horn grew several inches before Lemillion felt a pull throughout his whole body. Before he could even ask what was happening, he was just gone. Eri looked at the spot where Lemillion had once stood before running over to Joker. The older woman was lying on her back, some of her teeth missing and blood pouring from her mouth, but still she laughed. Joker, are you okay?" Eri asked as she tried to pull her into a sitting position, but her meager strength was not enough. "Don't worry, Eri, it only hurts when I laugh. He. Ow," Joker said, sitting up and noticing the absence of a certain hero. "Well, that was rude. First he comes here unannounced with all his friends and then he's gone, leaving us to clean up the mess. I've known hookers who get more respect." Ha, Joker said, spitting out a few teeth as she stood up, straightening her suit as she went to rendezvous with her team, now Harley skipping happily next to her as she held her hand. Bane walked with his army at his back. Today was the day they made Overhaul pay for Magna's death. The crimson sunset behind them drenching all in its blood-colored light. He stepped onto the path to Overhaul's home. "Should we not do this with more stealth, Bane?" Dobby asked as he stood to Bane's left. Bane shook his head. "I want him to see us coming. I want him to know the wrath he's brought down on himself and see there's nowhere to go," Bane said as he saw 5 figures running down the path towards them. Immediately several dozen guns were aimed at the figure. "Hold," Bane said as the group stopped a few yards in front of them. Bane smiled under his mask. "Ms. Joke, what are you doing here?" Bane asked calmly as the woman who was carrying Froppy on her back shook in place, facing an army of villains and Bane himself. "Is that Sue? What happened to her?" Toga asked, stepping forward to investigate the unconscious heroine. "Don't come any closer. Shindo, Jiro, get out of here and take Froppy with you," Joke shouted, tossing Froppy to the young woman who jumped off the ascending path, sliding down the incline into the city, followed by Shindo. "Aw shit, should we go hunting, boss?" Leech asked excitedly, looking over at the young boy and his 2 compatriots. "No, we're not here for kids," Bane responded before stepping forward as Joke began to glow blue as all the gunmen began to laugh uncontrollably. "Is this all you can do?" Bane asked, standing head and shoulders above the heroine who stared into his mask, seeing her frightened face reflected in his lenses. "I'm a hero, so do whatever you want to me, but don't you dare hurt those kids," she shouted, spinning on her heel and delivering a kick to Bane's arm, not even budging the giant. Bane grabbed her leg and was about to crush it before Dobby shouted. "She's worthy," he said, stepping forward looking at Ms. Joke. "I deem her a true hero." Bane sighed before flinging Joke off the side of the path. "Very well, Dobby. No one is to go after Ms. Joke or her charges. Is that understood?" Bane questioned, hearing agreement from the ranks as he began to walk up to Overhaul's hideout. "Do you think the heroes came to take out Overhaul and got the shit beat out of them?" Muscular asked, chuckling a little. "That'd be my guess. No doubt the heroes came here to take out Overhaul and his special ammo, but it looks like they failed," Bane said as he and his warlords walked into the courtyard, seeing the oddest gathering of people in front of him. Most were women, ranging from a scarecrow-like girl to a young man with two-toned hair and a large scar over his left eye. "Who are you? Do you work for Chisaki?" Bane asked, preparing to fight as he heard the various movements of his people. A woman stepped out of the line with white hair and gray eyes. "I am Killer Frost, and on behalf of the Joker family we welcome you, Bane. Joker is eager to see you. I'll take you and only you to her," Killer Frost said, walking towards the front door. That shit bitch. Where the boss goes we go," Muscular shouted as 2 flames impacted one another in front of the large blonde, one blue the other red. Don't insult my mother. Two-Face growled, stepping forward as Dobby did the same, the two staring at one another before Killer Frost stepped in between the two. Ivy, would you please lead Bane inside? I need to speak with my sons. Killer Frost said as she turned from Shoto to Dobby. It's been a while, hasn't it, Chuya? Ray said, stroking Dobby's face, whose eyes were wide in shock. Mother? He asked, shocking everyone in the crowd. Bane centered himself. One task at a time. He thought to himself. I'll be fine. Besides, the Joker has been a morbid curiosity of mine. I just haven't had the time to look into its good. I'll get this out of the way, and well, we do owe them for taking care of Overhaul for us. Bane said, following after Ivy. Besides, if I don't call you or am not back in 10 minutes, wipe this place off the map. He ordered, hearing a resounding, yes sir. Bane walked down the hallway following the form of Poison Ivy. If he wasn't mistaken, he was sure he'd seen this girl in the UA Sports Festival, but that was inconsequential now. They soon entered a living room, he would assume, with a coffee table and a couch. He looked around and noticed the hastily cleaned bloodstains across the walls, but what caught his attention was Joker. As he looked at her, he thought she was familiar, but the scarring threw him off until he remembered seeing old pictures of his mother and how thin she used to be. He grit his teeth as he looked into the eyes of none other than Inko Midoriya. Joker smiled as she looked at Ivy. You can go, Ivy. If Bane is to be here with no backup, neither will I. She said as Ivy eyed Bane for a moment before taking her leave, shutting the door behind her, and just as the door clicked shut, Joker leapt from the couch with insane speed and landed on Bane's chest, squeezing him. Bane acted on instinct, reaching to crush her head before a cry rang out. Izuku, you. Bane stopped, his fingers just brushing her hair before he stopped. Joker rubbed her face back and forth against his chest armor, smearing it with white face paint before looking up at him with tears in her eyes. My baby boy, I've missed you so much. I looked so hard. Let me see your face, she said, reaching for his helmet before his hand clamped on hers. Bane looked out from his mask at her as Inko continued to cry. Please, just once, I need to know, she said, jerking against his grip before he pushed her off him and reached for his helmet and disengaged the magnetic locks and pulled it off. Inko's eyes widened as she looked into the face of her son and grabbed hold of his head, keying him all over. Izuku's hair had started to grow longer, he'd need to cut it again, and she noticed the look in his eyes, so deep and full of intelligence. I knew it. Everyone said you were dead, but I knew you weren't, and then I saw you on TV and I'm so proud of you, she shouted, hugging him to her chest. Bane was stunned before he pulled back. What happened to you? He asked, tracing the scars on her face. Who did this? He asked, getting angry. He'd stopped being Izuku, but even he wasn't able to neglect his mother's pain. It doesn't matter, I took care of it and now I'm going to take care of you. Whatever you want, I'll do it. I now know you can be anything, Izuku, hero, villain, whatever you want, I'll be there to make sure it happens. I'm the Joker and I'm here to put a smile on your face. Hey, Inko said, looking at her son as she felt a presence at her back. Oh, and this is Harley, she's really excited to meet you. I've been telling her everything about you, Joker said, placing Eri between them. The little girl looked up into Bane's eyes before hugging his leg. It's nice to meet you, big brother Izuku, Eri said, hugging his leg tightly. Izuku placed his large hand on the girl's head, engulfing it in his palm. So Izuku, what's next? Joker said, her eyes glowing with joy as Bane smiled. Everything. Epilogue. The chairman of the Hero Association, Kunakita, was in another meeting with the board. They'd been going round and round for the past few days since Ms. Joke returned badly injured, telling them the mission was a failure. We need to end this, send in the JSDF and wipe them out. This is no longer something we can handle delicately. The villains have an entire city at their disposal, not to mention those blasted monsters standing at the gates. We'd never be able to sneak in the kind of firepower we need to wipe out that infestation. We're better off blowing them up. At that moment the office door opened and there stood a battered Eraserhead. The entire room went silent in shock at the hero's appearance after being declared dead. Eraserhead. Aizawa threw out his hands, throwing knives into each board member's neck, watching them bleed out as he moved towards Kunakita, who reached for a gun under his chair, only for Aizawa to slide across the table, kicking Kunakita in the chest and knocking the gun from his hand before holding a knife to his throat. Let's stop there. I'm not here to kill you, I'm just the messenger. Aizawa spoke as his face began to melt off as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a phone and dialing a number as the form of Toga Himiko in her hero suit was revealed. "Ooh, it's ringing," she said as she turned the screen to face the Kunakita as it showed Bane's face. Kunakita paled at this. "Hello Chairman, it's good to speak with you. Hopefully Toga wasn't too rough on you." Toga pouted behind the phone. "Ah Bane, that's mean," she said, pouting as she let go of Kunakita. "Don't do anything stupid Chairman, we have your daughter. People are so trusting of heroes, it's really easy to kidnap them with someone like Toga on our side." Kunakita grit his teeth. "You're bluffing," he shouted angrily. "Are you really willing to take that chance, Chairman? Either way, I'm here to tell you that I got your declaration of war. You sent your heroes into my kingdom to take out one of my allies, so now that you've fired the first shot, I will march my army of villains across all of Japan and break you all over my knee, and when all is said and done you will know that this was your fault." Kunakita growled. "You bastard. You talk about waging war on this nation and tell me it's my fault. I'll have the JSDF bomb you before you take a step outside of your so-called kingdom." Bane laughed and nodded. "Go ahead, that's probably your best bet, but if you do, know that your daughter will die too, as well as all the innocent people here, and even if you do, I'll be safely away by then and you'll have killed all those people for nothing. Do what you will, it won't stop me." Bane shouted as the call ended and Toga jumped off the table. "Yeah, I'm walking out now. If you try anything, Bane will throw your daughter naked into the streets, and you can imagine where it'll go from there. Anyway, bye," Toga said, sauntering out of the room, leaving the chairman to sit and await the coming horrors. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.